Hi guys, welcome to Midnight Anime Library. My crew is stronger than the plot armor part 3 chapter 41, Kizaru makes his move Garp's complete defeat. If he hadn't stepped in to save him just now, Garp would likely be severely injured by now. Kizaru was completely unsure at this moment whether he could hold back Saitama and allow the others to evacuate safely. He turned his head to look. Garp had completely passed out at some point. He lay unconscious in Yamakaji's arms. On the marine side, only himself and the other three vice admirals remained. These headquarters elite soldiers were practically non-existent in the face of Saitama and Hawkeye. Kizaru did a quick mental calculation, and alarm bells began ringing in his head. It seemed that he had already lost the qualification to fight against the opponents. Even at full power, he could probably only deal with Saitama alone. The remaining three vice admirals could hold off Hawkeye, but would Lilluan on the opposing ship take action? Kizaru had no way of confirming this. But no more hesitating. I'll hold back that bald guy. Yamakaji, take Vice Admiral Garp and the others and evacuate quickly. Leave this ship to us. Anigumo, Dogman, you two hold off Hawkeye. Move. After Kizaru finished speaking, the three vice admirals behind him immediately sprang into action. He watched as Anigumo and Dogman drew their swords and headed toward Hawkeye. Kizaru's body instantly transformed into points of light again, attacking in Saitama's direction. Mr. Saitama, have you ever been kicked at the speed of light? Kizaru didn't even let out his signature laugh this time. He was clearly being very serious. Facing Saitama, Kizaru didn't dare to be arrogant. He didn't hold back as he usually did and instead went all out. Seeing that Saitama didn't react at all to his lightspeed strike, a flicker of secret joy passed through Kizaru's heart. It seemed the opponent couldn't react to his speed at all. But just as this lightspeed kick was about to hit the opponent, in Kizaru's pupils, an image of Saitama suddenly appeared, turning his head at an incredible speed and staring straight at him. And then Kizaru saw Saitama gently raise his palm, just as he had done when facing Garp's attack. At the same time, Kizaru was unable to pull back his strength and could only kick towards Saitama. His leg coated in armament hockey, Kizaru delivered a full power kick. Pain. That was Kizaru's only sensation when he kicked Saitama's palm. Kizaru now understood why Vice Admiral Garp had ended up severely injured after a round of punches against Saitama, and had even been knocked unconscious by that staggering killing intent. Because the Saitama before him was simply too tough. Kicking him was like hitting an incredibly hard block of iron, on a completely different level from the Marine's iron body technique. Moreover, all the power he directed at the opponent seemed to be easily absorbed by that palm, and the force even rebounded, injuring him. Kizaru only felt an unprecedented pain in his leg. He could only instantly elementalize to put some distance between himself and Saitama. Looking at Saitama, who still stood there with his simple art style, Kizaru felt that he was the most troublesome and powerful opponent he had ever encountered. Garp had previously emphasized in the office that the two members of the Otherworld pirate crew were mysterious powerhouses. But after clashing, he realized just how much weight the word powerhouse carried coming from Garp. Bang! Bang! Clang! Clang! Just then, Kizaru turned to see that Dogman and Anigumo were already locked in combat with Hawkeye. As the three swordsmen clashed, sword energy overflowed everywhere. As the world's strongest swordsman, Hawkeye's combat power was even greater than that of a typical emperor's first mate from a four emperors pirate cruise. Although Dogman and Anigumo could still hold their ground for now, they fell into a disadvantage as soon as the battle began. Yamakaji had already boarded another warship with Garp, and the other three warships had begun a rapid evacuation. What made Kizaru feel somewhat relieved was Saitama didn't seem to have any intention of stopping the three warships from leaving. He just stood there, watching him. A person who can turn into light, interesting. Kizaru wasn't angry at Saitama's assessment. Mr. Saitama, you are very impressive as well. I hope you can block the next move. As Kizaru spoke, a massive, golden light sword condensed in Kizaru's hand. The power radiating from this light sword was even greater than that of the three great swordsmen fighting nearby. The sharpness emanating from the edges of the light sword seemed to rend even the surrounding air. Ama no Murakumo. With a low shout, Kizaru grabbed the light sword and slashed toward Saitama. In Kizaru's hands, the power of this light sword was comparable to a supreme grade sword. Kizaru knew very well that he could never be Saitama's match in a direct physical confrontation. However, what Kizaru didn't expect was that even after he unleashed the Ama no Murakumo, the opponent still made no move to defend himself. He slashed out with the sword. Kizaru hadn't even considered the possibility of missing. Looking at Saitama standing there, Kizaru couldn't help but want to ask, "Why don't you dodge?" However, the answer came in the next second. Because in his line of sight, Saitama, who had been standing still, reached out his palm toward the sword. Kizaru had actually encountered this situation before when fighting pirates. After all, many arrogant pirates believed their armament haki could withstand a strike from his Ama no Murakumo. However, in the end, these people would always have their palms or arms sliced clean off by his slash. Without exception. Seeing Saitama's fair hand, completely devoid of any armament haki coating, actually catching his Ama no Murakumo, Kizaru couldn't understand how Saitama had done it. But Kizaru felt that his sword could no longer move, it was being held firmly by Saitama. Before Kizaru could react, boom! The light sword in his hand was crushed by Saitama, turning into points of light scattered across the sky. However, as a glint fruit user, this didn't cause any substantial harm to Kizaru. With a thought, Kizaru instantly reformed the Ama no Murakumo. It even bypassed Saitama's raised hand and slashed toward his face. This strike was incredibly fast, even faster than his lightspeed kick just now, making it even harder to react to. A look of joy even appeared on Kizaru's face. Unfortunately. Chapter 42, Saitama, Kizaru, this punch, 0.5% of strength sizzled the blade of the Ama no Murakumo sliced into the deck as smoothly as a hot knife through butter. But seeing this, Kizaru's pupils suddenly constricted. Saitama's figure had disappeared at some unknown point. This speed of disappearance even exceeded the limits of Kizaru's vision, he hadn't seen when or how Saitama had vanished at all. Almost at the same moment his consciousness registered Saitama's disappearance, Kizaru activated his elementalization and rapidly flew into the sky. After reforming his body in mid-air, Kizaru finally noticed Saitama had appeared not far behind the spot where he had just been standing. However, he didn't seem to be in a fighting stance, he was just standing there, seemingly observing him. "Your ability is quite interesting, but I wonder how its defensive power is." As Saitama spoke, Kizaru felt as if he had become a toy. The opponent seemed to find his ability amusing. The reason he hadn't attacked directly was that he wanted to test the ability more, to play around. After this thought occurred to him, Kizaru's first reaction was intense anger. Since obtaining the glint fruit, this was the first time anyone had dared to treat him like this. As a Marine headquarters admiral and one of the world's top powerhouses, Kizaru had his own pride. Although Saitama was strong and his abilities strange, but he was no weakling either. Yada no Kagami. Facing Saitama on the ground, Kizaru unleashed his signature technique. As Kizaru crossed his hands and pinched his thumbs and index fingers together, two dazzling points of light erupted high in the sky. Even Luluan and Pluton nearby were drawn to these 2 points of light in the high altitude. As the light from the 2 points grew more intense, they became even more blinding than the sun. Then, countless dazzling light bullets shot towards Saitama on the warship. The light bullets were released at extreme speed and over a wide area. The front half of the warship was riddled like a honeycomb within 2 or 3 seconds. Hawkeye, Dogman, and Enigumo, who were fighting nearby, were also affected. They quickly fled the area covered by the Yada no Kagami. They arrived at the rear part of the warship. By now, Dogman and Enigumo already had quite a few wounds on their bodies. It was obvious that the two of them were no match for Hawkeye. But glancing at Kizaru in the sky, who was decimate everything like a small sun, the two of them felt a bit more confident. However, after using Yada no Kagami, it appeared on the surface that Kizaru had a massive advantage. But Kizaru, high in the sky, knew that this move hadn't achieved any substantial results. Saitama's figure had already vanished the moment he launched the attack. Looking down from high above, this time, Kizaru barely managed to discern Saitama's movement. His running posture was extremely comical, but his movement speed could basically keep up with the speed of Kizaru's light-based attacks. Not a single shot of his proud Yata no Kagami could hit that man. Most importantly, while running to dodge the light bullets, that man was actually looking up at him the entire time. Although the other's expression remained simple, even somewhat comical, but Kizaru really couldn't laugh right now. Because Kizaru knew clearly, Saitama, he was likely about to take the initiative to attack him. Although he still didn't know Saitama's true ability, the thought of it made Kizaru's heart skip a beat. Just by standing still and lightly raising a hand, relying on pure power reflection, he could severely wound Vice Admiral Garp. That terrifying killing intent just now had directly shocked Vice Admiral Garp into unconsciousness. That killing intent was mainly directed at Garp, but even the pressure leaking from the edges was enough to make even him, a Marine Headquarters Admiral, feel the strain. This man before him was truly... Wait! Where did he go? One moment he was dodging the light bullets of Yata no Kagami, but the next, he had completely vanished from his field of vision. Hi! As Saitama's voice suddenly boomed in his ear, Kizaru felt the hairs all over his body stand on end. A lethal sense of threat swept through his body and mind. Kizaru felt as if his heart had momentarily stopped. And this lethal sense of threat also activated Kizaru's combat instincts, instinctively causing him to elementalize his body. Kizaru turned into points of light, looking at Saitama, who had appeared within his range. He felt Saitama's figure suddenly become infinitely large. For this punch, I'll use 0.5% of my strength. I want to see if you, this ball of light, can take one of my punches. Hearing these words from Saitama, Kizaru's first thought was that he was being insulted. 0.5% of strength, not even 1/10. This was far too insulting. One must remember he was a Marine Headquarters Admiral. One of the Marine's strongest combatants. And most importantly, looking at the fist Saitama had raised to strike him, it was covered by red leather, but there was no armament hockey attached to it. Such a fist should have absolutely no lethality against his elementalized self. Why was this person so confident? And when he spoke, he even seemed a bit concerned, as if reminding him to be careful to take this punch with 0.5% of strength. It was too contemptuous. And too ridiculous. But then, Kizaru ceased to have any thoughts. Because within his photonized vision, Kizaru felt as though he could see nothing, and all his thoughts came to a standstill. He could only see a fist tightly wrapped in a red leather glove, magnifying infinitely within his consciousness. A massive character for death appeared before his eyes. At this moment, Kizaru recalled his life from birth to growing up, to obtaining the Logiotype Glint fruit and becoming one of the 3 Marine Admirals. His life had been smooth sailing, a clear path. In just a few decades, he had become one of the strongest people in the world. But whether it was the Marines, the pirates, or the world government, that group of swine called the Celestial Dragons, his own ambiguous justice, all of it, looking back now, seemed to have no meaning. Only this red fist, carrying the word death, seemed capable of making this world into the one he envisioned. Perhaps being hit by this punch like this would be a very fine ending. Chapter 43, One Punch, Kizaru seriously injured. Boom. Clearly, this punch was not imbued with any armament hockey. Yet, this punch, clad in a red glove, struck the ball of light in front of him in such an unreasonable, brute force manner. An unparalleled shockwave passed through the ball of light and slammed into the ocean below. In an instant, giant waves surged upward. A massive fist imprint, roughly several hundred meters in diameter, appeared abruptly on the sea surface below. It formed a huge void in the ocean. Moreover, the force of the punch continued, until the entire ocean was forcibly carved out into a fist-shaped void several hundred meters in diameter and over 1,000 meters deep. Only then did the force seem to dissipate. This punch kicked up massive waves that swept out in all directions. The marine warships, led by Yamakaji, had already begun sailing in the opposite direction. Pushed by these waves, they instantly fled at an even faster speed. Meanwhile, the half-destroyed warship beneath Hawkeye and the other two, which had been struck by Kizaru's Yasukani no Magatama, was also nearby. Just as the waves approached, it was nearly capsized. Fortunately, Hawkeye, Dogman, and Enigmo all acted simultaneously. With sword energy crisscrossing, they forcibly intercepted the waves. On the other side, when the waves were about to hit the warship where Luluan was, they were wiped out before Luluan even had to make a move. Looking at Pluton beside him, Luluan was even a little unhappy at this moment. Playing with water was clearly his own specialty, but his subordinates were just too powerful, leaving him with no chance to show off. However, the power of Saitama's punch was truly not to be underestimated. It's hard to say how much strength Saitama used. Perhaps not even 1%. Luluan looked at the ball of light in the sky and couldn't help but speculate. After all, Luluan was very clear about how powerful Saitama was, and in this world, Saitama was defined as invincible. He had instructed Saitama to hold back earlier, which was why the ball of light hadn't been extinguished by that punch. The ability users in this world are quite interesting. Looking at that ball of light, Pluton seemed to find it amusing. After muttering to himself, he turned his head to look at Luluan beside him. "Captain, may I go over and play? Consider it a small experiment." "Of course." Upon hearing Pluton's words, Luluan nodded non-committally. To Pluton, Kizaru, who existed as light, would likely be a rather interesting toy. Moreover, since arriving in this world, this was the first time Pluton had shown interest in anything from this world. Since coming to this world, Luluan always felt that Pluton was a transcendent being. Seeing him want to play now actually made Luluan feel quite happy. Furthermore, Kizaru, Luluan really wanted to see what this Marine Headquarters Admiral would become after being toyed with repeatedly by his two subordinates. Would he still maintain that ambiguous justice of his? Would his mentality collapse? Just thinking about it felt quite interesting. The next second, Pluton's body vanished from where he stood, and Luluan also raised his head to look at the ball of light that had just been punched by Saitama. At this moment, the ball of light in the sky was slowly transforming back into a human shape. And at the same time, a significant amount of red blood was seeping out from the ball of light, dripping onto the sea surface. Admiral Kizaru. Soon, the ball of light completely turned back into Kizaru's body. Kizaru was now covered in wounds, with blood constantly dripping down. Seeing Kizaru so heavily injured, Dogman leaped directly into the air, caught Kizaru, and returned to the half-destroyed warship. Cough, cough. Kizaru coughed softly twice, and quite a bit of blood sprayed from his mouth. He looked up at Saitama falling from the sky, his eyes filled with disbelief. What had just hit him was not the traditional attack imbued with armament haki. It was a force of absolute purity. This power was so terrifying that it broke the restriction that only armament haki could strike an elemental form. Attacking with the purest strength caused him to suffer heavy injuries even while in his elemental form. It was as if that punch hadn't just aimed at him in the air. It had struck the entire expanse of air in front of him. Every molecule, every existence had been impacted by that punch of absolute power from Saitama. It feels good to be alive. Lying in Dogman's arms, this thought couldn't help but surface in Kizaru's mind. Now, the understanding and even the worldview Kizaru had built over so many years had been completely shattered by Saitama's punch. Watching Saitama land on the warship and walk slowly toward him, Kizaru didn't even know what to do now. So, that's how your ability works. I thought you were light itself, like Pluton, but I didn't expect you to just possess the ability to use light. After Saitama walked closer, he looked at the heavily injured Kizaru and said this. Upon hearing Saitama's words, Kizaru keenly caught another key piece of information. Pluton. Who is that? It was another person the Marines had never heard of. Could this person also be part of this otherworld pirate crew? Hearing Saitama say this, Kizaru couldn't help but make such a guess. Dogman and the others behind him looked even more grim. Now the three of them were supporting each other, covered in wounds. This was completely different from what they had imagined when they set out. Fortunately, Yamakaji had already left with Vice Admiral Garp. Watching the three warships disappear from sight, the three of them had even prepared for the worst. This battle was simply too outrageous. Everything that had happened was already beyond what they could accept or handle. Even Kizaru, watching Saitama walk slowly toward him, didn't know what he should do. After all, if Saitama wanted to, none of them would be able to leave here today. "Hey, Pluton, you're here." "Yeah, I came to take a look." When they saw Saitama turn his head and start speaking toward a direction beside him, Kizaru and the two vice admirals present were all stunned on the spot. Although they could hear Saitama's voice and see him conversing with someone, in all their perceptions, there was no one in that direction. Whether it was visual, auditory, or observation hockey probing, they could not sense the presence of anyone else. Only Hawkeye looked toward that direction and nodded respectfully. At the same time, Hawkeye was very curious observing the reaction of Kizaru and the others. Why does it feel like Kizaru and the others can't see Lord Pluton? Oh, right, except for the people in our pirate crew, everyone else cannot perceive me, because any of their perceptions are annihilated the moment they approach me. When Pluton finished saying this, within the perception of the Marines, it was as if a voice and a person had appeared out of thin air. Pluton, clad in black armor, had just appeared in the perception of Kizaru and the others. Listening to Pluton's words and looking at the Pluton before them, the heavily injured Kizaru's pupils constricted sharply once again, and the expression on his face grew increasingly solemn and desperate. Chapter 44, Pluton makes a move, the battle ends this person. Very strong. Kizaru, possessor of the glint fruit, only felt that an endless darkness seemed to surround this person. The light he was most familiar with seemed to be completely non-existent around this person. This person, called Pluton, seemed to not belong to this world at all, yet it existed in reality. Kizaru had only felt this strange sensation from one other person. That was Saitama, who had just severely injured him with a single punch. "Kid with the power of light, your ability is quite interesting. Use your light ability to attack me." Pluton looked at Kizaru, who was being supported by two others, and spoke slowly. Kizaru looked at Pluton. Struggling, he stood up straight with the support of Dogman and Enigumo. He extended his finger, pointing it at Pluton. A faint point of light gathered at Kizaru's fingertip. As the point of light grew brighter, Kizaru's face gradually turned paler. Once the point of light had gained a certain level of power, Kizaru jabbed his finger, and two yellow beams of light shot toward Pluton. This attack was the strongest one Kizaru could currently unleash. Kizaru knew clearly now. If he wanted to survive, he had no choice but to listen to these two mysterious powerhouses before him. Saitama alone was already in existence he couldn't handle, and now another unfathomable figure, Pluton, had appeared. Aside from doing as they said, Kizaru had no other choice. And the two yellow laser attacks that Kizaru had fired, just as they were about to reach Pluton's body, they were eerily fixed in mid-air. The two beams of light were as if a pause button had been pressed. Kizaru and the others, including Hawkeye, were stunned when they saw this scene. To freeze this kind of energy-based attack in mid-air as if it were a solid object, such a method was truly too inconceivable. In everyone's view, Saitama and Pluton approached the two beams of light. Saitama reached out and grabbed them, as if holding a yellow stick. Then Saitama casually shook it. He looked like he was having quite a bit of fun. After approaching the beams of light, Pluton gently extended its finger. Then, at the tip of Pluton's finger, a tiny, pitch-black black hole suddenly appeared. The beam of light disappeared completely the instant the black hole appeared. After seeing this, Pluton's face showed a look of disappointment, and it shook its head. It seems this is just an imitation of the ability of light, not light in the true sense, and not the light of this world itself. As Pluton spoke, the light stick in Saitama's hand also instantly turned into countless points of light and vanished into the air. Pluton turned its head to look at Kizaru, then stepped forward and walked to Kizaru's side. As Pluton approached, Dogman and Enigumo intended to stand in front of Kizaru, but their actions were directly stopped by Kizaru himself. Kizaru forced himself to stand in place, welcoming Pluton's arrival. Although he wanted to meet Pluton's gaze, due to his current poor physical state, Kizaru could only hunch over and stand with difficulty. After arriving at Kizaru's side, Pluton reached out and placed its hand on Kizaru's shoulder. The instant Pluton's hand touched his body, Kizaru felt a special power coursing through him. That feeling. It was like an octopus's tentacles, slithering through every part of his body, seemingly absorbing something. This feeling caused a trace of fear to involuntarily well up from the depths of Kizaru's heart. Because he truly didn't know what this energy was doing inside his body. At this moment, Kizaru looked up at the Pluton in front of him, only to find that in the eyes of the other, the emotion of joy was increasing, as if it had discovered something interesting. Gradually, Kizaru felt as if the most essential energy within his body was being held and studied by the other party. Kizaru couldn't even describe what he was feeling right now. But he always felt that a portion of the power within his body was being forcibly condensed together. So, the source energy of this world is carried by fruits? After hearing Pluton mutter this sentence, Hawkeye, who was to the side, subconsciously looked at Kizaru. Source energy, fruits. What Lord Pluton was talking about must be the devil fruit. After hearing Pluton's words, an extremely ominous premonition welled up in Kizaru. Kizaru felt that the source power granted to him by the glint fruit was, at this moment, being forcibly condensed together by Pluton's tentacle-like energy. And inside his body, at this very moment, a solid object the size of a fist seemed to have appeared. Furthermore, he could completely no longer feel the energy of his glint fruit at this time. The next second, Kizaru watched helplessly as the hand Pluton had originally placed on his shoulder was withdrawn. And now, in that hand of Pluton, it was no longer empty as it had been when it first reached over. Instead, there was a fruit covered in strange patterns. Kizaru couldn't be more familiar with this devil fruit. Because this fruit was the one he had eaten back then, the Logio-type glint fruit. At that time, he had forced himself to swallow the entire fruit despite the nausea. But now, this fruit had appeared right before his eyes. Devil fruit. If it is consumed by someone. Generally, only when the person who ate the devil fruit dies does this fruit randomly appear somewhere in the world. But now, the energy that Pluton controlled and released into his body seemed to have forcibly stripped the devil fruit ability directly out of his body. And it looked like it had even directly turned that energy into its most original form. After this devil fruit was removed from his body, Kizaru felt all the strength in his body suddenly drained away. The fruit ability he had completely mastered for so many years disappeared at this moment, completely extracted by Pluton. This ability was truly too inconceivable. Kizaru watched all of this happen helplessly. The shock he received at this moment was unprecedented, and his entire mind was shaken. Unable to accept it for a moment, he actually fainted directly. Feeling Kizaru collapse into their arms, Dogman and Enigmo also knelt directly on the ground, facing the standing Pluton and Saitama in front of them. The two felt as if they were looking at two high mountains, two terrifyingly huge figures, blotting out the sky and sun, severing everything. All the knowledge accumulated over so many years since birth was completely shattered at this moment. The three slumped on the ground. Enigmo and Dogman were tearful and snotty, seemingly on the verge of a breakdown. Pluton looked at the fruit in its hand, then looked up at the sky. This world seemed to be a bit more interesting than it had imagined. These fruits were carriers of the most fundamental rules of the heavens, and the reason they descended into this world and were consumed by people, granting these humans these abilities. The purpose of these fundamental rules was also not that simple. At this moment, Pluton's gaze seemed to transcend all boundaries, seeing something of the truest nature of this world. Then it turned its head to look at Saitama. Looked at Luluan. Smiled. The glint fruit in its hand turned into countless points of light once again, flying into the body of the Kizaru who was lying there. Then, with a flash, it returned to the ship and sat down on the lounge chair beside Luluan. Saitama followed closely behind and lay down on the other side of Luluan. On that half of the warship, only Hawkeye remained. Hawkeye looked at the three blood-covered people lying on the ground, his sharp yellow pupils fixed, not knowing what he was thinking. A moment later, he also returned to the ship, looked at the three lying there, Luluan and the others, and also lay down next to Nami. Chapter 45, The Desperate Marines. They're gone. Dogman turned his head to look. Kizaru, one of the three admirals, the most invincible in Marineford, was now covered in blood and lying on the ground, completely unconscious. Meanwhile, the other vice-admiral, Anigumo, was trembling unnaturally, staring blankly at the deck before him, lost in thought. Dogman reached out and gave Anigumo a nudge. It was as if Anigumo had been spooked by something. He let out a sharp cry and collapsed to the other side. His body began to shake even more violently. It seemed he had been scared into a mental breakdown. Seeing this, Dogman felt an incomparable terrify in his heart, seeing his trusted superior and old friend reduced to such a state. Tears and snot streamed down Dogman's face. The terrify in his heart was also amplified, but he forced it down and immediately jumped to Anigumo's side. Slap! 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 He slapped Anigumo hard, over and over, trying to snap him out of it. Anigumo, Anigumo. Wake the hell up! Are you really going to let a pirate scare you insane? Do you want Admiral Kizaru to die here? They're gone now. Snap out of it. Look around you. With tears in his eyes, Dogman looked at his trembling friend. Helplessness and despair filled his chest. But more than that, he was worried about Kizaru and his friend. Dogman shouted until his voice was hoarse. As hot tears fell onto Anigumo's cheeks, his body stopped trembling as much, and he stared straight at Dogman's face. Just as Dogman was about to reach his limit and break. Down! Dogman! Anigumo's trembling voice came through. Though the voice was filled with dread and shaking, to Dogman, it was the most reassuring sound in the world. Dogman held Anigumo tightly. The two grown men were moved to tears, but after crying for a short while, they helped each other up. They looked at Kizaru on the warship. The half-warship they were standing on was sinking. Because of the battle just now, this warship could no longer sail. Fortunately, there were many small boats around the warship. The two of them carried Kizaru and quickly moved to a small boat. They didn't dare hesitate for a moment. With all their might, they began rowing in one direction. At the same time, they took out a Den Mushi and contacted Yamakaji's unit, which had already evacuated with the heavily injured and unconscious Garp. Captain, those marine guys are gone. After sensing their departure, Hawkeye turned his head and said to Luluan. But seeing Luluan and the other two lords still relaxing comfortably on their lounge chairs, as if nothing had happened, Hawkeye didn't say anything more, but his gaze was very complex. Now, although he had made up his mind to join the otherworld traveling group and wanted to head toward a brilliant future with these mysterious powerhouses. After the battle, Hawkeye realized just how far behind he was compared to the others on this ship. He also realized once again just how mysterious this otherworld pirate crew he was in really was. In such a powerful crew, he, the world's strongest swordsman, might really only be fit to be a chef. After all, Hawkeye didn't know exactly how many people were in the otherworld pirate crew? How many more powerhouses like Pluton were there? Would others like Pluton suddenly appear and join the otherworld pirate crew in the future? In the future, would a top-tier powerhouse who uses a sword appear? Thinking of this, Hawkeye suddenly felt that his future had something great to look forward to. Nami, sitting on her lounge chair and reflecting on everything that had just happened, was now somewhat clear-headed. On this ship, she seemed to have become the only outlier. Everyone around her, whether it was the captain, Mr. Saitama, or Mr. Pluton, was so mysterious and powerful. Even the world's strongest swordsman she had seen in the newspapers, Mihawk, one of the former Shichibukai, was now on this ship. Such a legendary figure had actually become her comrade. The Arlong pirates were subordinates of Jinbe from the Sun Pirates, who was one of the Shichibukai. And Mihawk was even more powerful than that Jinbe among the Shichibukai. Nami now only felt a sense of unreality. It was as if everything that had happened recently was a dream. It was as if she, a common village girl, had become a child chosen by the heavens. During her time at sea, through the newspapers, Nami had gradually learned information about other regions of the world. And through her conversations with Mr. Mihawk, Nami clearly realized just how incredibly lucky she was to have become the navigator on such a ship. Such luck! Her dream of drawing a map of the world would surely be accomplished much more easily now. Thinking of this, Nami turned her head to glance at Luluan. With a sweet smile on her face, she began to fall asleep peacefully. Vice Admiral, why don't you let us go for the rendezvous? You should take Vice Admiral Garp back first. Cut the crap. I'll go meet them personally. Fleet Admiral Sengoku has already sent Vice Admiral Momosaji to meet us. Don't let anything else go wrong, you must protect Vice Admiral Garp at all costs. Yamakaji looked at the soldier, whose eyes were already bloodshot. He, too, had tears in his eyes. Both he and the soldiers on the warship knew how dangerous it was to go and rendezvous with Dogman, Onigamo, and Admiral Kizaru. The enemy clearly had the combat power to end everything, yet they let those three escape. There were only two possibilities for this. One was that the enemy was setting a trap. The other was that the enemy had deeper designs. Regardless of the possibility, whoever went to meet Dogman and the others would certainly be in great danger. However, Yamakaji knew clearly that he was the only one who could go to Dogman's side. Sending these youngsters from Marineford would be no different from sending them to their deaths. After all, if they all went together, the target would be too large and there would be too many variables. After giving orders to these Marineford elites, Yamakaji personally piloted a small boat and sped off in the direction Dogman had mentioned. Meanwhile, the soldiers on the three warships stood ready as they headed toward Marineford with the heavily injured Garp. Yamakaji piloted the small boat. His heart was heavy. As he recalled everything that had happened today, large teardrops rolled down Yamakaji's face. Vice Admiral Garp was his most trusted elder brother and his idol from childhood until now. Dogman and Onigamo were his colleagues. As swordsmen, the three of them often sparred together, they had a deep bond and knew each other's strength well. Admiral Kizaru was usually quite laid back. But in critical moments, he was always the most timely and reliable one. Moreover, these people all had their own sense of justice and were supposed to be good people. But why? Why did this happen? Why was that other-world pirate crew so powerful? Yamakaji didn't understand. When they set out, everyone was laughing and talking, but in such a short time, all that was good seemed to have been stripped away. Dogman! Onigamo! Is that you? After searching for most of the day in his boat, Yamakaji found the three men lying in a small boat. Looking at the three of them, all covered in blood, Yamakaji's tears flowed even more freely. After bringing the three onto his boat and seeing their torn flesh and dripping wounds, Yamakaji looked in the direction the otherworld pirate crew had left, his anger surging and burning, but at the same time, a deep sense of powerlessness made him feel utterly desperate. Chapter 46 Kizaru and Garp awaken, Marineford Assembly Vice Admiral Momosaji. Vice Admiral Tokakake. Seeing the two jump onto the deck. The many marine officers who were originally on high alert instantly swarmed toward the two. Both were admiral candidates of Marineford, and their strength was very formidable. One was a tall beauty who combined mature charm with the aura of a sharp master swordsman. Her features were exquisite and gorgeous, a typical Japanese-style beauty. Her eyes were enchanting when smiling, but revealed a swordsman's sharpness when focused. She wore a pink kimono embroidered with a broken branch floral pattern. Her figure was extremely tall with impressive curves, and her posture was elegant. The neckline was low, and the famous blade kanpira was strapped to her waist. The other had a rounded face and often wore a pair of purple round-frame sunglasses. When he grinned, he showed slightly uneven teeth, and a cigarette was always hanging from his mouth. He wore a standard yellow and white striped suit, but his tie was loose, and his jacket was often left open casually, making him look unkempt. He was short and stout, with a slouching posture and hands in his pockets, far from the elite image. Looking at the state of these Marineford elites, the expressions on Gake and Momosaji's faces became very serious. When they first received Fleet Admiral Sengoku's orders and heard the news, they found it simply inconceivable. Marine hero, Iron Fist Garp, was heavily injured and unconscious. Admiral Kizaru was heavily injured, with his life or death unknown. Marineford Vice Admirals Dogman and Enigmo were also in unknown condition. With such a top-tier combat lineup, plus over 1,000 Marineford elites, even in a direct confrontation with the four Emperor's pirate crews, they might not have ended up so miserably. Neither of them knew exactly what had happened. But after receiving the order, they had rushed over immediately to complete the rendezvous mission. Led by Vice Admiral Garp's adjutant, they entered the cabin lounge and saw Vice Admiral Garp, his arms covered in bursting wounds and his fists unnaturally twisted. Garp's hair was gray, and he lay there with a deathly pallor on his face. Momosaji couldn't help but cover her mouth tightly, her pupils shrinking sharply as tears unconsciously filled her eyes. Beside her, Geik no longer had his previous nonchalant attitude, he looked extremely serious. "Where is Vice Admiral Yamakaji?" Reporting to Vice Admiral Geik, Vice Admiral Yamakaji took a small boat to rendezvous with Admiral Kizaru and the others. "Which direction?" "Take me there quickly." "Momosaji, you protect the warship and return to Marineford immediately. Find a ship doctor to treat Vice Admiral Garp at once." Seeing Geik's serious look, Momosaji didn't say anything more for a moment but nodded. As Geik left with Garp's adjutant, Momosaji added a word of caution. "Be very careful. Don't worry, I will definitely find Admiral Kizaru and the others and bring them back alive." When Geik said this, his tone carried an unprecedented determination. He took one last deep look at Momosaji and then left the room. He also took a small boat and left the ship. 2 days later. Marine Headquarters. Marineford. The atmosphere across the entire Marineford base was more somber than ever before. Fleet Admiral Sengoku stood outside the infirmary door, looking at Garp and Kizaru lying inside, his face full of worry. It had been a full 2 days since Garp, Kizaru, and the others were rescued and treated. During these 2 days, Sengoku hadn't closed his eyes. Marine Headquarters Admirals Akainu and Akiji had also been recalled to the Marineford base. Although Dogman and Enigmo's injuries were minor. Because they had exhausted all their energy while escaping, they were also unconscious in their hospital beds and had not yet woken up. No one knew what exactly had happened during that battle after everyone left with Vice Admiral Garp. However, the news that Garp had seriously injured himself with a heavy blow accompanied by black and red lightning had already been reported to Fleet Admiral Sengoku by the adjutant on the warship, without missing a single word. Naturally. He also fully informed Sengoku of the battle scene where that bald man, Saitama, had casually raised his hand and blocked all of Vice Admiral Garp's attacks. Seeing the look of terror on Sengoku's adjutant as he described it, Sengoku knew just how terrifying the strength this man named Saitama had displayed must have been to scare the adjutant by Garp's side to such an extent. One must know that Garp was one of the strongest individuals in the entire Marineford. As his adjutant, he had seen a great deal. For him to be in this state, the battle that had heavily injured the 2 highest combat powers of Marineford could be well imagined. Meanwhile, the expressions of Akainu and Akiji beside him were different. At this moment, one could see how angry Akainu was just from his face. Every time the adjutant mentioned how powerful Saitama was, Akainu would reveal a look of disdain. Akiji, on the other hand, was in a contemplative mood, seemingly thinking, if they could achieve such a feat, just how strong was the otherworld pirate crew? Vice Admiral Tsuru and several other vice admirals were also waiting outside. Cough. As a slight cough sounded, Sengoku immediately pulled open the door and strutted over, sitting down beside Garp. He watched as the gray-haired Garp struggled to open his eyes. That high-spirited face, which Sengoku usually found annoying and wanted to punch whenever he saw it, now appeared somewhat old and helpless. Sengoku's tears involuntarily and uncontrollably rolled down. Cough, cough, water. Hearing Garp's weak voice, Sengoku immediately picked up the water from the side and handed it over. After more than an hour of care, Garp was barely able to prop himself up and sit at the head of the bed. Seeing that mischievous old man now sitting there somewhat blankly, everyone present was deeply moved. After all, everyone knew what Garp's usual state was. Seeing him like this, they really wanted to know what Garp had gone through. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, Admiral Kizaru, as well as Dogman and Enigmo, have all woken up. hearing the news that everyone had awakened. The Marines cried and laughed as they busied themselves with care. Finally, by dusk, everyone had been attended to. Relying on their monstrous physiques, not long after waking up and having a hearty meal, they had more or less regained their vitality. Later that evening, inside the largest meeting room in Marineford, Fleet Admiral Sengoku sat in the head seat, while Garp and the other injured men still lay on hospital beds within the meeting room. At the long table below, basically 80% of all the admirals and vice admirals of Marineford had arrived. Marineford had been as fully assembled as it was today for an uncountable amount of time. And at this meeting, there was only one thing everyone was discussing. Regarding the matter of the Otherworld pirate crew, should it be announced to the world? If it were to be announced to the world, what would be an appropriate bounty to set for these people? Chapter 47, Otherworld Pirate Crew, First Bounty Announcement. Sengoku, these people are much more powerful than we imagined, much more. Garp's opening sentence immediately caused the meeting room to fall into an abnormal silence. After hearing this, Akainu was the first to slap the table. Vice Admiral Garp, everyone present knows what you're saying, but please elaborate. Exactly how powerful are they, and what are their respective abilities? Although Akainu felt somewhat disappointed by the obvious trace of fear in Garp's tone regarding those pirates, Akainu was no fool. He knew better than many present just how powerful Garp truly was. Even Akainu himself couldn't be certain that, facing a full-strength Garp, he could inflict such heavy damage as that Saitama had. Furthermore, the other admiral, Kizaru, was currently severely injured. And looking at him, he no longer possessed his previous lazy demeanor. Akainu knew how difficult it was to achieve all this and how exaggerated the opponent's strength must be, but at this moment, he didn't want to be a coward before the fight, feeling defeated before even meeting them. Looking at the other officers in the meeting room, Akainu was truly furious. Then I'll talk about my previous battle with the man named Saitama. As Garp spoke, he looked up, recalling everything that had happened. At the very beginning, I actually knew this man's fists were incredibly powerful because I saw a fist print he left on the Konomi Islands. That one punch obliterated half the island. During the actual combat, Garp's heavy voice slowly filled the meeting room. For such a proud old man like Garp to speak of that battle with a tone full of disbelief and powerlessness was striking. When mentioning Saitama, the sense of despair he felt was easily heard by everyone in Garp's voice. I used Conqueror's Haki infusion in my attacks. My fist bone meteor seemed no different from an ordinary punch to that man. When my full-strength strike hit his palm, it must have felt like a child's play to him. As Garp reached this point, Akiji's voice rang out in disbelief. That's absolutely impossible, Master Garp. I think he must have used some ability or means you're unaware of. It's absolutely impossible to take a full-strength Haki infusion strike through sheer physical constitution alone. No one in this world can do that. Hearing Akiji's incredulous voice, Garp looked around the meeting room. Most of the officers had eyes equally filled with disbelief, just like the doubt Akiji had raised. Seeing this, Garp didn't say anything more. Instead, Kizaru's voice chimed in just in time. What Mr. Garp said is true, without any exaggeration. Furthermore, after Mr. Garp was seriously injured and unconscious, I also fought that Saitama. He only used 0.5% of his strength in one punch against me, and I almost died on the spot. Kizaru then explained Saitama's terrifying speed and unbelievable power to everyone. Even without armament Haki, he could rely on pure strength to severely injure or even kill an elementalized body. As Kizaru spoke, there was a trace of lingering fear in his voice. Hearing Kizaru say this, the skeptical looks in Akainu and Akiji's eyes vanished completely, replaced by pure shock. What do you mean 0.5%, Kizaru? Don't exaggerate. That person must have used his full strength. After hearing Kizaru's words, Akainu seemed unable to bear it after a long while, or perhaps he wanted to give himself strength through his own tone, and shouted at Kizaru while slamming the table. However, in the face of Akainu's shouting, Kizaru had no intention of stopping. That Otherworld pirate crew doesn't just have Saitama. Another person appeared who wasn't in our intelligence, called Pluton. Pluton? Yes, that seems to be his name. His ability is the most inconceivable I've ever seen. He could completely pull the energy out of my body. He extracted the glint fruit I had eaten from within me. At that moment, my abilities vanished entirely, but now, the power of the glint fruit is still there. I suspect he returned the ability to me. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Inside the meeting room, Akainu's furious appearance was witnessed by everyone present. Most of them also wanted to denounce the statements of the two just now like Akainu, to prove their words were false. Because what they said was truly unbelievable and difficult to understand. Yet, the two spoke with such a truthful tone. Every word they said, and every nod from Dogman and Enigumo, was hitting them hard. Until Kizaru finished speaking completely. At this moment, only Akainu's heavy panting and the rapid breathing of many officers remained in the meeting room. Sengoku, sitting in the head seat, lightly tapped the table with his index finger, trying to digest everything he had just heard. Compared to the officers sitting below, as the fleet admiral, he indeed had contact with higher combat powers and the absolute top level of the world government, the Gorosei. But even the legendary Gorosei probably couldn't achieve everything that the men named Saitama and Pluton had done. Now, he could only choose to report the contents of today's meeting truthfully to the Gorosei as soon as possible. And then, next, let's discuss the bounties and then release them. It's time the world knew of the existence of this otherworld pirate crew. This matter is no longer something our marine can solve alone. I must report to the Gorosei immediately. You will continue to be stationed in your respective areas as planned, but if you encounter the otherworld pirate crew, do not act on your own, you must report to headquarters immediately. Following that, the voices of the officers rose one after another in the meeting room. Sengoku also spoke about the information of the members of the otherworld pirate crew to all the officers present for the first time. Adding the information just updated by Garp and the fleet admiral, after intense discussion, the final bounties for the members of the otherworld pirate crew were confirmed. Regarding the titles of the members of the otherworld pirate crew, they also discussed a great deal. But since the information at hand was still relatively limited, the titles for the first edition of the wanted posters for the otherworld pirate crew, especially for the mysterious Captain Luluan, were quite enigmatic. Otherworld pirate crew captain. Mysterious Captain Luluan, bounty, 3,560,000,000 berries. Otherworld pirate crew vice captain, Bald Fist Saitama, bounty, 3,020,000,000 berries. Otherworld pirate crew vice captain, Pluton, bounty, 2,768,000,000 berries. Otherworld pirate crew cook, Hawkeye Mihawk, bounty, 2,534,000,000 berries. Otherworld pirate crew navigator, Cat Burglar, Nami, bounty, 3,000,000 berries. While the Marines were confirming their discussions, the news crew that had previously stayed on the Marine warship, having witnessed the battle between the two sides, was flying rapidly in a certain direction. Chapter 48, Morgan's Super Big News. New World. Headquarters of the World Economic Newspaper. As one of the emperors of the underworld and president of the World Economic Newspaper, Morgan's. At this moment, sitting in his office and looking at the news in front of him, cold sweat was pouring out of him. But at the same time, flames of excitement were burning in his eyes. Big news. This is big news. This is big news in the true sense of the word on this vast ocean. Morgan's is a user of the zoantite bird fruit, model, albatross. He has a large beak, small eyes, white feathers all over his body, a large tail, and wing-shaped appendages that resemble hands. He wears a black top hat with a red and white feather inserted into it, a light blue shirt, and a yellow bow tie. On his lower body, he wears red and white checkered trousers and a black cloak. Big news. It is the thing Morgan's is most interested in this world, and he is always thinking about how to publish the big news he collects to the world. What was laid out in front of him was the biggest breaking news in nearly a decade. Marine hero Garp is seriously injured and in a coma. Marine Headquarters Admiral Kizaru was defeated with a single punch and also fell into a coma from his severe injuries. Hawkeye is suspected of having joined a pirate crew never seen before, along with a bald man in pitch black armor. A very handsome young man, and a beautiful, hot-bodied young woman. Moreover, Morgans was very familiar with the ship in the picture. It seems this pirate crew must have stolen the celestial dragon's Tenri Yubito tribute, which is why the Marine dispatched such a powerful lineup, yet even with this lineup, they were crushed by this mysterious pirate crew. Morgans looked at every piece of news in front of him. Almost any one of them could serve as a front-page headline. And all these messages were concentrated on a strange, seemingly unprecedented pirate crew. Although he saw these messages with his own eyes now, it took Morgans a long time to convince himself to accept it all. After all, this news was simply too explosive. A pirate crew that had never been heard of before. A man who had never had any battle record. Had actually defeated Marine hero Garpin Marine Headquarters Admiral Kuzara one after another. To defeat these two people, and to do so consecutively while almost unscathed, even Whitebeard probably couldn't do it. The Tenri Yubito tribute was robbed, and it might even involve the killing of celestial dragons. As someone who had been in the news business for many years, Morgans had already keenly sensed this after seeing the Marine's series of actions. Such an existence, such an event. Could the Marine really keep it hidden? Probably not. Then should he be bolder and report this series of news, this series of major events that happened on the sea, completely and truthfully to everyone? As soon as this thought popped into his head, Morgans felt his heart begin to thump wildly. An unprecedented feeling of excitement swept through his whole body. Boys, work overtime today. Starting tomorrow, I want everyone in the world to know that there are guys in this world even more terrifying than the four emperors. Ha 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 ha. Vice Admiral, aren't the bounties for these members of the Otherworld pirate crew a bit too high? This must be their first time being wanted, right? Marine Headquarters, Marineford. The staff member responsible for issuing bounties was filled with disbelief after seeing the bounty orders provided by Yamakaji. Having worked at Marine Headquarters for so many years. 4 pirates being wanted for the first time. It was already a very, very rare occurrence for the bounty to exceed 100 million. But this time, every single one of these wanted posters had an extremely exaggerated number. You have to know that the current 4 emperors of the New World, with the exception of Whitebeard, only have bounties of over 4 billion. Shanks, one of the 4 emperors, currently has a bounty of 4.0489 billion. But this bounty was the result of countless battles that Shanks had experienced. And only after becoming one of the 4 emperors of the New World and becoming a thorn in the side of the Marine did he attain such a high bounty. Shanks, including all those at the level of the 4 emperors, only had bounties in the tens of millions when they were first wanted. But this Otherworld pirate crew. Except for that girl navigator, the remaining 4 people each have a bounty of over 2 billion berries. Those 2 named Luluan and Saitama even had bounties exceeding 3 billion on their first time being wanted. This number is simply as outrageous as it can get. It's equivalent to the fact that overnight, a presence even more terrifying than the 4 emperors' pirate crews suddenly and inexplicably appeared in this world. Although they don't have as many members or as vast a territory as other 4 emperors' pirate crews. But this Otherworld pirate crew. Each one seems to be a powerhouse at the level of the 4 emperors. It's equivalent to 4 emperors. Forming a 4-person pirate crew alone, just thinking about it feels a bit terrifying. Especially looking at Vice Admiral Yamakaji's grave expression, and recalling the various rumors circulating in Marine Headquarters these days. He tremblingly took the document regarding the bounties handed over by Yamakaji. This officer immediately prepared to start producing the wanted posters. However, just as he was about to produce them, the officer discovered another major problem. Vice Admiral Yamakaji, do you have photos of them? Photos? Hearing the officer's question, Yamakaji was a bit stunned at this moment. How about I describe their appearance, and you draw it? After hearing Yamakaji's words, the officer, although not very willing to agree, really had no other choice. So, based on Yamakaji's description of them, one wanted poster after another for the Otherworld pirate crew was thus produced. And they began to be distributed by this officer. Coo. Give me a few newspapers, little bird. At this time, on a ship in the East Blue, Red Hair saw the news coup, whose density was significantly higher than usual, with a pack around its neck that was noticeably larger than before. He accurately tossed a few berries into the sky. The news coup's beak picked up a few newspapers and scattered them onto the ship. The members of the Red Hair Pirates picked up the newspapers one after another and started reading. Let me see, what news is there today? I hope something interesting happened. Lucky Roo, who was holding a large meat leg in his hand and eating it, said boredly and casually picked up a newspaper to read. Holy crap! Captain! There's big news! Big news! Just by glancing at the headline. Lucky Roo instantly widened his mung bean-sized eyes, his tone full of panic, and shouted loudly at Red Hair. However, as soon as Lucky Roo turned around, he saw that everyone on the entire ship had their eyes wide open and their mouths agape, looking at the newspapers in their hands. No wonder. Because the headline of this newspaper was simply too eye-catching and too unbelievable. Mysterious strongmen strike, defeating Garp. Kizaru. Leaving both seriously injured and in a coma. Chapter 49, Shocking the Whole World. Look at the picture, Garp and Kizaru are both heavily injured. On the ship. A man with gray-black hair, a cigarette dangling from his mouth, dressed in a black t-shirt, army green cargo pants, and black Dr. Martens boots. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the picture in the newspaper. In his impression, these two had always been invincible figures. Yet both were covered in blood, passed out on the deck of a marine battleship. Ben Beckman looked at this picture, unable to describe what he was feeling inside. Even though they were pirates and the marine were their natural enemies, seeing the marine's top powerhouses heavily injured and unconscious should have made him very happy. However, he looked around. Whether it was the other crew members or Red Hair, the captain, their expressions were exceptionally serious at this moment. The cheerful atmosphere in the air also came to an abrupt halt. The atmosphere on the entire ship instantly became heavy. Who exactly is this bald man in the bodysuit? How come I have never seen or heard any news about him? Also, why is Hawkeye with him? Red Hair, now looking at the content shown in the picture, had countless doubts in his heart. Right now, he couldn't wait to meet Hawkeye. In this world, Red Hair had always believed that only Whitebeard and those few celestial dragons bastards could manage to defeat a man like Garp and Kizaru. But now, these two people, whom he considered to be the world's top powerhouses, had both been beaten into such a state by someone. This bald guy. Who exactly is he? Just how strong is he? Red Hair's mind was currently enveloped in countless questions. Pops, the news coup has arrived. New world. On a massive ship. A man with a crescent-shaped white mustache curving upwards on his face, possessing a massive and robust build. Although he was hooked up to IVs and oxygen tubes, cared for by the ship's doctor and nurses, he still looked incredibly imposing. This man was the captain of the Whitebeard Pirates, one of the 4 Emperor's pirate crews, known as the world's strongest man, standing at the pinnacle of the great pirate era, Edward Newgate. Garararara. Let me see, what interesting things have happened on the sea again. Whitebeard laughed heartily, and Marco, who was beside him, quickly bought a batch of newspapers and distributed them on the ship. Then, he came to Whitebeard's side, intending to read some interesting things about the sea to Whitebeard, just as he usually did. But just as he opened the newspaper, before he could speak, Marco was stunned by the content in the newspaper. Looking at the exaggerated headline and then at the picture, Marco's expression changed drastically, and such a change naturally could not be hidden from Whitebeard, who was sitting in his chair. What's wrong? Son? Has something happened? Pops, Kizaru and Garp have been defeated. There was undisguised astonishment in Marco's tone as he said this. Then, he handed the newspaper in his hand to Whitebeard. Whitebeard looked up. When he saw the headline, he didn't react much, but after seeing the picture, Whitebeard's eyes also widened. Just how strong is that old guy Garp? He knew that all too well. Even for him right now, dealing with that old guy would be quite strenuous. Wanting to heavily injure and knock him unconscious would likely require him to pay a huge price. Perhaps in his current state, Whitebeard felt that he might even perish together with Garp if he went all out. Kizaru, an admiral of the headquarters, possessed the glint fruit and was also one of the world's top powerhouses. Even if he was indeed a bit naive in some aspects, it did not hinder the fact that his strength was formidable. In this world, there aren't many who can defeat these two. And those who can heavily injure them are almost non-existent. Even if there were, it certainly wouldn't be this strange bald man in the picture, wearing a yellow bodysuit and red tight gloves. "Pops, are you all right?" Marco, watching Whitebeard silent, clutching the newspaper in his hand, and looking dazed, asked with concern. "I'm fine, son. Pops, it's not just that bald man and that mysterious pirate crew, even Hawkeye now seems to have joined them." "Hawkeye? I never expected that someone like him would join someone else's pirate crew." Hearing this, the expression on Whitebeard's face became increasingly grave. "Son, it seems a remarkable person has appeared in this world." "What? Kizaru and Garp have actually been defeated. Wano country. The man known as the strongest creature in the sea, land, and air." At this moment, in the sky, he had transformed into a dragon and was roaming violently. Kaido, after finishing today's newspaper, transformed into his azure dragon form and began to surge wildly through the clouds. In his heart, he was incomparably excited, but at the same time, he also felt fear. Even though he had never seen that bald man before. But just by hearing of this battle record and looking at that picture, a trace of fear actually emerged in Kaido's heart. Although he always proclaimed he wanted to die. He wanted to find someone to kill him. But in reality, after seeing this picture, Kaido discovered the reason he dared to commit suicide before, crazily using various methods to kill himself, was because he clearly knew that those methods couldn't kill him. Those methods could only kill those weaker than him. The reason he shouted such slogans was merely to bolster his reputation as the strongest creature in the sea, land, and air, and to make his beast's pirates' prestige stronger and stronger. To be able to intimidate his enemies more and more. And to secure his position. Nobody in this world isn't afraid of death. This bald guy is definitely not simple, he might be in existence on the level of that person. At this moment, Kaido couldn't help but start calculating his own schemes. Mama, calm down. New World. On Cake Island in Tado Land. The Four Emperors Charlotte Linlin was frantically eating the desserts around her. Her mood looked exceptionally irritable, and the sons around her were cautiously trying to persuade her. This was Charlotte Linlin having one of her episodes. And the reason for this episode was because she saw the content in the newspaper. It must be said that this event, this piece of news, indeed achieved the effect Morgans wanted most after it was published. Today's news, in the true sense, shocked the whole world. Chapter 50. To bring about destruction, one must first be driven mad. Sengoku, your marine's performance this time was truly abysmal. Listening to the angry voice coming through the Den Mushi, Sengoku offered no rebuttal. The voice on the other end of the Den Mushi eventually fell silent after a round of scolding. In this so-called otherworld pirate crew, there are no members of the D-clan, right? None. Then I'll leave this matter entirely in your hands. Consider this round a loss for the Marines. Pirates have been getting increasingly rampant lately, Sengoku. You'd better find a way to redeem the Marines' reputation. If you fail again, it might be time for a new fleet admiral. He heard the sound of the Den Mushi hanging up. Sengoku looked at the Den Mushi in his hand and recalled the Gorosei's words. He found them laughable. The D-clan. The Gorosei were nothing more than 5 old, useless fools. They lacked any judgment regarding the situation, their minds filled only with their own self-righteous notions. Every single person in this otherworld pirate crew was clearly extraordinary. Whether it was that Saitama or that Pluton, their strength had already far exceeded the scope of their imagination. Furthermore, everyone's abilities were full of the inconceivable. They weren't any of the abilities recorded in this world. Even so, just because there was no D in their names, the Gorosei completely disregarded them. It was truly foolish in the extreme. However, having this matter handed over to him had another benefit. That was not having to send more Marines to their meaningless deaths. If the Gorosei hadn't listened to him and insisted on the Marines suppressing the otherworld pirate crew, then it was very likely that the Marines' current vital forces would be mostly destroyed, and their reputation would be completely lost. Now, at least after the bounties for the otherworld pirate crew were released, presumably, no one from either the Marine or pirate side would dare to easily cause trouble for them. That would certainly save a lot of trouble. Fleet Admiral, Fleet Admiral. Today's newspaper from the news coup. Look quickly, the paper reports the news of Admiral Kizaru and Vice Admiral Garp's defeat. Taking the newspaper from the soldier's hand, Sengoku flipped through it. This news is written quite well. After seeing the headline and the content, even Sengoku couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Morgans was truly a natural-born newsman. The content of this newspaper would indeed allow this incident to spread at an even more exaggerated speed. It would also, in the shortest time possible, let people know just how terrifying that otherworld pirate crew really was. Although this news might affect the Marines' reputation, even Sengoku had to admit that the content in the newspaper was indeed the truth. Moreover, Morgan's news was actually written quite conservatively. After all, the defeat of Kizaru and Garp was achieved by Saitama alone in a short period of time. But this news only wrote about the defeat of the two. Sengoku didn't believe for a second that Morgans hadn't seen the entire process of the battle. Clearly, Morgans had considered many aspects when writing this news. Knowing that he would see it and that the otherworld pirate crew would see it, Morgans likely chose to edit the content this way after much deliberation. Furthermore, it was only today, 3 days after the event occurred, that he chose to report this news. Morgan's behavior seemed bold, but in reality, it was also a disguised signal of goodwill to both himself and the otherworld pirate crew. Sengoku squeezed the newspaper hard with his hand. Recalling the information he had obtained about the major event the world government was preparing for in the near future. A light flashed in Sengoku's eyes. He immediately gave orders to the soldier beside him. Go, today, be sure to release the bounties for the otherworld pirate crew. Let's make this news even hotter. Watching the soldier leave, Sengoku sat in his seat in the office. Since this matter could no longer be hidden, he might as well add more fuel to the fire and let it burn even brighter. Let the momentum of the pirates in this world grow even grander. To bring about their destruction, one must first let them go mad. The fire he was adding now might very well become a powerful tool for his comeback in the future. I'm the man who's going to become the Pirate King. At the same time, on a small island in the East Blue, a young boy wearing a straw hat set off on his own adventure in a small wooden boat. The straw hat on the boy's head was the one Red Hair had given him before leaving not long ago. Not many people knew of this boy's departure. Because in this world, countless people clamored to go out to sea every day. Whether a child from an ordinary family went to sea to become a pirate or a marine, no one would pay attention, and an author wouldn't even bother to write these few lines here. Perhaps, this is the terrifying power of bloodline. Captain. This is just too amazing. On the way to the Grand Line, Lululan performed a very cool display of walking on the sea for Nami. With every step he took in midair, a current of seawater would instantly appear beneath his feet, supporting him as he walked freely through the air. A few days had passed since they repelled the Marine group. Lululan's control over seawater could be said to be getting more and more proficient. Moreover, Lululan's physique was becoming increasingly powerful. Getting stronger just by lying around, it truly made Lululan feel fantastic. Lululan felt that even without using his aura, an ordinary vice admiral would likely no longer be his match. The only thing he lacked now was perhaps actual combat experience. But there was no helping that, after all, his subordinates were too strong. Whether they encountered sea kings or some blind pirates, Hawkeye would usually deal with them directly. During this journey to the Grand Line, in the days since repelling the Marines, Hawkeye had already wiped out several pirate crews and harvested a lot of loot. Lululan felt that the Marines' efficiency probably wasn't as high as Hawkeye's. And there was one thing Lululan was very unclear about. The closer they got to the Grand Line, the more pirates they encountered. How could the Marines be so stupid? They actually hadn't sent heavy forces to guard the entrance to the Grand Line. Little bird, give me a few newspapers. Traveling through the air on sea currents, Luluan greeted Inuzku warmly as he saw it flying toward them. Reading the newspaper every day had almost become a habit for the entire crew. After all, drifting boringly on the sea without any information made the newspaper the only source of news. However, unlike before, this Inuzku seemed to recognize him and was terrified of him. Luluan felt very puzzled by this. But that confusion completely vanished after he took the newspaper, watched the Inuzku speed away, and opened it to see the contents. Chapter 51, Nami's First Battle. This Morgans is truly bold, he dares to report anything. Opening the newspaper. After seeing the headline and the pictures, Luluan couldn't hold it together. The angle the Inuzku took the photos from was actually quite good. It fully displayed the miserable states of Kizaru and Garp, while also making Saitama look like some mysterious big shot. One can only say that the Inuzkus of this other world indeed possess very formidable photography skills. Presumably, this Inuzku's girlfriend must praise it often. This is... Wow! Captain! I've been given a bounty. Seeing several sheets of paper fall out of the newspaper, Luluan hadn't even seen what they were before Nami's excited shouts echoed from the ship. At this time, several people held newspapers in their hands. Pluton and Saitama merely gave them a brief glance before losing interest. Saitama had absolutely no concept of things like his own bounty. Pluton clearly didn't take such trivial matters to heart either. On the ship, Nami was celebrating her bounty of up to 3 million alone. Hawkeye, on the other hand, was looking at his own bounty poster and those of the other members, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Holy crap! My goodness, how is my bounty nearly catching up to the 4 emperors? After seeing the numbers on his bounty, Luluan really couldn't help but curse. The bounty amount the Marines gave was truly a bit too high. It was completely different from the fanfiction novels he had read before. In those fanfictions, even if you had already defeated an admiral or one of the 4 emperors, the bounty might very likely only be set around 1 billion or so. It seems novels are just novels after all. This world is still very realistic. Since both Kizaru and Garp were defeated, if the bounty were only 1 billion or so, it would indeed be a bit of a joke. However, his own picture on this bounty poster was really a bit, well, it was nothing more than a blurry, impressionistic sketch. It was as if the portrait had been done by an impressionist. Aside from himself, the pictures of the remaining people were all very clear and looked very good. Nami had a bright smile, with a basket of oranges in front of her. It was obvious this photo was obtained from Kokoyashi village. The picture on that kid Saitama's bounty poster was unreasonably handsome. A yellow jumpsuit, red gloves, and then a back view that looked down upon the world. It seems the Inuzku also knew that Saitama's art style from the front was a bit too simple, so it chose the back view as the main photo, but that was enough. He looked at Pluton's bounty poster. It was simply unreasonably cool. Black armor and a resolute face. That overwhelming kingly aura was displayed to the fullest by just a single photograph. And this title, Pluton. The Marines were really a bit too shameless, actually using the man's name directly as his title. In Luluan's mind, images of the Marines surrounding and suppressing him in the future even flashed by. You are Pluton, right? Just thinking about it was amusing. However, after seeing these bounty posters, Luluan did somewhat realize why the Marines would allow these bounties and this news to be exposed. Although he hadn't expected the Marines to set his bounty so high. But the fact that this news would be leaked was indeed within Luluan's expectations. In other words, it was within Pluton's expectations. After repelling the Marines, and after Pluton obtained information about this world from Hawkeye's mouth, Pluton had already told him 2 days ago that the Marines would definitely release this news. Pluton's tone had been so certain. Luluan even started to wonder if Pluton was a transmigrator too. He really is. So Luluan chose to believe. Looking at it this way, Lord Pluton is truly worthy of being Lord Pluton. He really predicts things like a god, having completely anticipated the Marines' moves. Captain, our bounties are so high. I feel that after entering the new world, we might face a lot of trouble. Hawkeye walked toward Luluan with the newspaper and spoke to Luluan, who was in the air, from the ship. Luluan, meanwhile, descended from the air onto the ship by stepping on the seawater. With a very impressive tone, he patted Hawkeye's shoulder and said pretentiously, "Don't worry, Hawkeye. Actually, in this world, there aren't that many people who dare to look for trouble. After all, in my eyes, not just anything can be considered trouble. Then he calmly walked past Hawkeye, giving Nami, who was looking at him with starry eyes, a cool toss of his head. He began his daily leisurely life of fishing. Hawkeye, however, froze in place, as if pondering Luluan's words just now. A moment later, Hawkeye smiled. Then he took Nami and began their daily training. Under Hawkeye's tutelage, Nami had already learned armament hockey and observation hockey. She had even achieved some success in swordsmanship. It had to be said that Nami's talent was also very high. The Marines had indeed given her a bounty that was a bit too low at 3 million. Current Nami should be worth at least around 5 or 6 million berries. According to Hawkeye, Nami's current combat power was basically comparable to a Marine headquarters commander. With a top-tier famous teacher like Hawkeye teaching her, and since Pluton had previously helped Nami eliminate a wave of impurities in her body, the current Nami could definitely be considered a cultivation genius of the One Piece world. However, she had the same problem as himself. Too little actual combat experience. After training for about half an hour, Hawkeye suddenly turned his head to look to his left. To the left, there was a pirate ship swaying as it sailed toward them. After Hawkeye sensed the aura on that pirate ship, he spoke to Nami. "Didn't you always want actual combat? Just right, all the people on that pirate ship coming over will be left to you." Upon hearing Hawkeye's words, Nami not only lacked any emotion of fear, but even appeared somewhat excited. Since joining the ship, Nami had not slacked off on her training for a single day. And after that time when Mr. Pluton took action to clear the impurities in her body, she felt that both her comprehension and her physique were becoming stronger day by day. Sparring with teacher Hawkeye on the ship. Nami felt like there was no sense of accomplishment at all, as if she were consistently making no progress. When they encountered pirate ships causing trouble before, she never had a chance to act because teacher Hawkeye would solve the trouble with a casual swing of his sword every time. Then the seawater would even lift the gold, silver, and jewelry from that pirate ship and deliver them to their own warship. Now she finally had a chance to act herself. In Nami's eyes, an unprecedented sharp light was revealed. Chapter 52, Crick, Overlord of the East Blue. Commodore. There seems to be a Marine battleship ahead. East Blue Waters. Aboard the dauntless battleship Cutlass. Jin the Man-Demon used his telescope, and after spotting the Marine battleship in the distance, he spoke to Crick beside him. The dauntless battleship Cutlass was a massive galleon with 3 decks, sailed by the Overlord of the East Blue, Crick. The bow was shaped like a black panther, and the skull on the flag had an hourglass drawn on either side, representing the deadline of death for captured prey, and symbolizing "You will surrender to me sooner or later, it's only a matter of time." The Krieg Pirates. A massive pirate crew with powerful influence across all waters of the East Blue. A Marine battleship? Upon hearing Jin's words, Crick didn't show any fear. Instead, he appeared extremely excited and thrilled. He snatched the telescope from Jin's hand and looked toward the distant battleship. It was a very ordinary, standard-issue battleship. Although its exterior had some ornate decorations, it wasn't the battleship of any powerful figure he knew, such as the Doghead battleship. Besides, they were about to enter the Grand Line. This was the perfect time to establish dominance and boost the confidence of his crewmates. "Boys, head toward them. This Marine battleship will be a gift from the Krieg Pirates to the Marines as we enter the Grand Line. It's also the beginning of the Krieg Pirates' fame spreading across the entire world." Crick spoke with immense pride and ambition. Looking back at his companions on the ship, his confidence reached its peak. With 5,000 subordinates and 50 subordinate pirate crews, they were known as the largest pirate fleet in the East Blue. For this entry into the Grand Line, he led a fleet of 50 ships. Leading them, naturally, was the flagship of the Krieg pirates, the dauntless battleship Cutlass. The remaining 50 pirate ships were still following behind because their speed was far too slow. This was part of Crick's plan. He could go in first to scout the way. After all, he truly wasn't familiar with the Grand Line. Though he boasted loudly, in reality, Crick felt he should at least get a feel for things before entering the Grand Line. Even Crick hadn't expected that at this critical juncture, a marine battleship would actually pop up to help him establish his prestige. If that large group of underlings following him saw him take down a marine battleship before entering the Grand Line, it would definitely make his group of underlings more cohesive. Charge! Target, the marine battleship! With a loud shout from Iron Walpearl, the speed of the dauntless battleship Cutlass suddenly increased, and it rapidly charged toward the marine battleship ahead. The pirates on the ship were all shouting and hollering, brandishing their weapons, extremely excited for the enemy they were about to encounter. Soon, the two ships were very close to each other. Crick saw that there were hardly any people on this marine battleship, and there was no cannon fire as they approached. He was actually very happy in his heart. Because this meant the battleship didn't belong to any big shot, its defensive state and combat power seemed completely pathetic. In that case, his plan to establish dominance would go off without a hitch. Furthermore, what surprised Crick even more was, up close, this battleship looked extremely noble. It was more impactful than it appeared through the telescope. It could be said to be the most luxurious vessel Crick had seen in all his time as a pirate. As for the people on Laluan's ship, they had known these people were approaching long ago. However, none of the three, Laluan and the others, made any extra movements. Those who were fishing continued to fish, and those who were lounging continued to lounge. Only Hawkeye and Nami stood ready. Nami held Yukibashi in her hand. She had already assumed a combat stance, her eyes full of seriousness. Meanwhile, Hawkeye stood behind Nami, acting as her support. "Are you ready, Nami?" "I'm ready, Mr. Mihawk." "Then let's go to their ship. Don't let these lowly pirates pollute our vessel." The moment Mihawk's words fell, he directly took Nami with him and leaped onto the opponent's ship in a single jump. At this moment, Laluan's eyelids twitched slightly. The Krieg pirate ship was fixed in that area of the sea, unable to move an inch closer. Just as the navigator responsible for steering the Krieg pirate ship was getting confused, not knowing what was happening, he heard a burst of laughter from outside. He walked out to take a look. The Commodore had already led a group of strong men to firmly surround the two unexpected visitors on the ship. "What a beautiful little lady. And you, old man, you two have quite the nerve to dare board our ship voluntarily." Facing Hawkeye and Nami, Crick, Jin, and the others showed no fear. On the contrary, the members of the Krieg pirates were currently full of excitement. One of the points of their excitement was naturally Nami, because of her fine figure and beautiful face. Holding a sword and filled with a heroic aura, she naturally caused this group of brutes to speak in a joking tone. On the other hand, another point of their excitement was Hawkeye. This point of excitement wasn't that kind of excitement for them. It was mainly because Hawkeye's outfit was a bit too aristocratic in style. Especially that sword on his back, encrusted with jewels. At a glance, it looked like a flashy prop. The man before them probably didn't even know how to use a sword. Especially seeing Hawkeye's elegant attire, Crick felt even more that the jeweled sword was entirely a prop for show. All of this made Crick realize that the man in front of him was definitely a noble from some affiliated kingdom. Otherwise, it would be impossible to have such a luxurious ship and such a beautiful female warrior as a companion. However, these nobles who had spent too long in sugar jars were indeed a bit too foolish. Just two people dared to challenge the great Krieg pirates, and even voluntarily came to their ship to seek death. Although this move might very well offend the Marines, they were about to enter the Grand Line and become the world's new stars. Just the Marines, if he offended them, so be it. Currently, he was a great pirate with a bounty as high as 17 million berries, the absolute overlord of the East Blue. What was wrong with bullying two nobles? Although that sword encrusted with jewels looked flashy and impractical, it was still qualified to be his trophy. As for the young girl with the fine figure in front of him, he. After hearing Crick's laughter, Jin, who was nearby, swung his weapon and walked directly toward Nami. Chapter 53, A single slash shreds the Krieg pirates. Captain, you must show some mercy. Ooh oh ooh. The total captain is about to make his move. Little girl, if you put down your sword now and come straight into our admiral's arms, it's not too late. Jin. The total captain of the Krieg pirates, dubbed Demon Person by Crick, is fiercely loyal to him, cold and devoid of human sentiment. The reason he's called the Demon Person is his ruthlessness. Even if an enemy cries and begs for mercy before him, he kills without blinking an eye. Among the pirates, Jin also holds considerable prestige. Jin walked toward Nami with a smirk on his face. The members of the Krieg pirates seemed to already see the scene where Jin would give Nami a sound thrashing and successfully capture her for the admiral. However, clang, as the sound of a sword ringing out echoed. The members of the Krieg pirates saw Nami, the girl they had always thought was weak. At a speed hard to capture with the naked eye, she thrust her sword toward their captain Jin. The cold glint of this sword strike caused everyone's expression to change drastically. However, Jin's reaction speed was also quite fast. He directly used the weapon in his hand to block Nami's strike. But after this clash, the playful look on Jin's face vanished, replaced by a very serious gaze directed at Nami. It seems you have some skill, but before me, Demon Person Jin, I'm afraid it's still not enough. Oomph, less talk. Nami was not affected after hearing Jin's words. Instead, she began to attack Jin with one sword strike after another. During this period, Nami had been learning from Hawkeye. She indeed wasn't very good at defense, but she was exceptionally skilled at offense. It was just that previously, she had no one to practice against. The Jin before her was, for Nami, an excellent opponent, a perfect whetstone. Asterisk clang. Clang. Bang. Bang, asterisk the sound of clashing metal rang out on the deck. The other members of the Krieg pirates tacitly refrained from intervening, choosing instead to watch the battle. Hawkeye stood to the side. He paid absolutely no attention to the other members of the Krieg pirates. After all, in Hawkeye's eyes, these people were no different from dead men. The moment they set sail and headed toward them with murderous intent, their deaths had already been decided. The reason he hadn't made a move yet was simply to allow Nami to hone her actual combat experience. So, at this moment, Hawkeye was focused entirely on watching Nami's offense. Crick, at this time, happened to be doing the same thing as Hawkeye. However, Crick was currently astonished by Nami's performance. As the overlord of the East Blue, the total captain of the Krieg pirates, Jin's bounty was as high as 12 million berries. He ranked second in the entire pirate crew. Crick truly hadn't expected that Jin would find an opponent who could be called an equal in this seemingly weak Nami. This felt somewhat unbelievable to Crick. Moreover, what Crick found even harder to accept was, as the battle continued, this fellow Jin actually began to fall into a disadvantage. One should know that usually, in the entire Krieg pirates, the only one who could spar with him was Jin. Even with his many types of weapons, they were often mostly ineffective when facing Jin. Jin's strength was famously high within the East Blue pirate circles. But now, Jin was about to be defeated by this woman. Are noble guards these days really this strong? If, under the watchful eyes of everyone, the total captain Jin lost to such a woman, that would likely be unacceptable for Crick's entire pirate crew. They were about to enter the Grand Line, and his original goal was to establish his dominance. Now such a major variable had appeared, completely contradicting his plan. Oomph, die. Hearing Nami's sharp shout, Crick turned his head and saw that Jin had now thoroughly fallen into a passive position. The sword in Nami's hand was striking at Jin again and again. At this point, Jin was completely powerless to resist, because the weapon in Jin's hand had been sliced in half at some point. Now, only 2 iron rods remained in his grip. Seeing that Jin was about to be defeated, Crick directly found the right moment, raised his arm, extended a cannon barrel from it, and fired a shot at Nami. This shot aimed directly at Nami's vitals, seemingly intended to kill her instantly. Furthermore, Crick believed that his speed in attacking, timed specifically during the brief recovery window after Nami swung her sword, would definitely succeed in one hit. However, what Crick didn't expect was, just as his cannonball was fired, a green sword energy swept toward his arm. Not only did it slice the cannonball in half, causing it to explode in front of him, but this green sword energy, coming from an unknown source, sliced through half of his arm like it was tofu and left a massive sword scar on the pirate ship behind him. Because the speed was so fast, Crick didn't even have time to register the pain. It wasn't until he saw his own arm fall onto the deck that Crick let out a scream of agony. The pirates nearby, seeing their captain wounded by the sword energy unleashed by that middle-aged man dressed as a noble. After a brief moment of daze, they swarmed forward, lunging toward Hawkeye to kill him. Accustomed to running rampant in the East Blue, these people actually held Crick in high regard. Now seeing their captain injured, they naturally chose to attack, even ignoring the fact that they had never seen anyone capable of slashing out sword energy before. Facing the crowd besieging him, Hawkeye didn't even give them a second glance. After taking Nami back to their ship with a single leap, he slashed a green sword energy directly at the Krieg pirate's ship. With just one strike, the dauntless battleship Cutlass was sliced in half. His sharp yellow eyes glanced into the distance, where the 50 small pirate crews and 50 fleets under the Krieg pirates' command were currently sailing toward them, though they were still very far away. But allowing these ants to continue bothering the lords would be somewhat impolite. So, after Hawkeye closed his eyes to concentrate, he delivered a horizontal slash toward the distant pirate ships, unleashing a massive wave of sword energy. Chapter 54, Reverse Mountain, Twin Capes, Pluton. Do you know that there's actually a lot of specialized knowledge when it comes to fishing? On the ship, Laluan looked at Pluton beside him, his tone serious and solemn. As he spoke, "Captain, I am all ears. First of all, fishing requires patience and a very good character. Besides that, one needs a modest heart and a love for marine life. Since we've already caught quite a few fish today, there's no need for you to keep sitting here and affecting my fishing. Go enjoy yourself elsewhere." Nami watched as Laluan chatted eloquently with Pluton. She glanced at the buckets of the two men. Pluton's bucket was already filled to the brim with fish. In fact, more than one bucket had been filled, the previous one had already been taken by Hawkeye to be cooked. Meanwhile, after fishing for the same amount of time as Pluton, Laluan was still empty-handed. The reason this situation occurred was because Captain Laluan had made a grand boast before they started fishing. "Even without using my abilities, just by fishing normally like you guys, I can easily beat you." After those words left his mouth, Laluan hadn't been able to catch a single fish. The activity of fishing had become a daily routine on Laluan's ship. After all, in Pluton's words, fishing was no longer just about catching fish, it was a matter full of philosophical reflection. One could even realize the truths of combat during the process of fishing, and grasp the true essence of life. Fishing was also a form of cultivation. Saitama expressed his absolute agreement with this point. Originally an otaku, under Pluton's influence, he had also gradually become addicted to fishing. Over the past few days, Laluan felt as if Saitama had become a different person. He always felt that Saitama seemed to have more of the aura of a grandmaster. This was definitely the influence of that old fellow, Pluton. As an absolute old-timer who was millions of years old, basically every time Pluton spoke, it carried a certain philosophical depth. In the beginning, Saitama would scratch his head just like Laluan, unable to quite understand, while only Hawkeye wore a thoughtful expression. But now, Saitama also seemed to have slowly fallen under Pluton's charm. However, Pluton's biggest fanboy had to be Hawkeye. Every day on the ship, Laluan could see Hawkeye holding a small notebook, very seriously recording some of Pluton's words. It was just like a saying fan. "Lord Captain, beauty is but a momentary sensation, only truth is eternal, and truth is never beautiful." Seeing Pluton stand up and start speaking those profound and mysterious words with his back turned again, Laluan couldn't help but roll his eyes. There was no choice, the fish in this area had all been caught by Pluton, so there was no point in sitting there fishing anymore. Laluan stood up directly and walked toward Nami. He turned a deaf ear to Saitama's happy shout from behind about finally catching a fish. Watching a beautiful girl practice her swordplay was much more interesting. A long time had passed since they last encountered anyone. The Creek pirates being wiped out by Hawkeye's single sword strike could be considered a twist of fate. Although he didn't know how Crick's group had provoked Hawkeye in the anime, in the grand scheme of things, the plot had come full circle. Now, he was about to reach Reverse Mountain soon. Laluan was actually quite curious about Reverse Mountain. For people from the Four Seas to enter the Grand Line, besides crossing the Calm Belt, the only way was through Reverse Mountain, making it the starting point of the Grand Line. The reason he didn't choose the Calm Belt was that Laluan knew clearly that besides a large group of Sea Kings, there was basically nothing there. It wasn't nearly as interesting as Reverse Mountain. In Reverse Mountain, not only was there an NPC and a giant whale, but most importantly, it seemed like it would be a lot of fun. Perhaps because they were nearing Reverse Mountain, their ship had basically become a rocking boat. Wow, what a high mountain! Over the past few days, Nami and Saitama had already lost count of how many times they had gasped in wonder. Of course, to maintain his cool, Laluan restrained himself from shouting out. However, every time he looked up at Reverse Mountain, he could only marvel at the uncanny workmanship of nature. He had indeed never seen upside-down waterfalls or mountains that grew in reverse. Thinking about sailing the ship through and being shot into the sky by the ocean currents, Laluan thought it would be very interesting. Hey! There's a lighthouse up there. That is the lighthouse of Twin Capes. Speaking of which, there's an old fellow living in there. Captain, if you're interested, we can go over and sample some of his gourmet food. The roasted giant king squid that old guy makes is very delicious. Looking in the direction Nami was pointing, Hawkeye explained to Laluan. Crocus. The former doctor of the Roger Pirates. As Hawkeye spoke, Laluan had already remembered this person, as well as that giant whale named Laboon. When he watched the story of the Rumbar Pirates and the whale Laboon, he was indeed moved by that steadfast loyalty. However, Laboon really was quite stubborn. As the warship moved forward at full speed, at noon, the group finally arrived at the entrance of Reverse Mountain, reached Twin Capes, and saw the lighthouse up close. Yo! As they drew near, they saw Laboon, whose head was covered in scars but who was still continuously ramming into the red line. Although he knew the story, seeing it with his own eyes was still inevitably shocking. However, Laluan did not plan to intervene in this matter. If it weren't for the roasted giant king squid Hawkeye mentioned, which indeed sounded delicious, Laluan wouldn't have much interest in coming here. Hey! Is anyone there? As Hawkeye leaped off the ship and went to the wooden door below the lighthouse to knock. Soon, a slovenly old man appeared in everyone's sight. And that old man was shocked upon seeing Hawkeye. He stared straight at Hawkeye for a moment, then shifted his gaze toward Laluan and the others. My Hawk, I really didn't expect that you would choose to join a pirate crew. And your crew seems very extraordinary. This Lord Captain, and these two lords, their presence is truly out of the ordinary. After entering the lighthouse, Laluan and the others received a round of flattery from Crocus. It could only be said that as expected of a man who had followed the Pirate King, his skill at flattery was not average. Of course. His discernment was indeed very sharp, and his culinary skills were superb. The roasted giant king squid was indeed worthy of Hawkeye's recommendation. It was countless times more delicious than the sashimi they had been eating for the past few days. Laluan even had half a mind to demote Hawkeye, the world's strongest swordsman, to this lighthouse so he could learn culinary arts from this old ship doctor. And while the group was heartily eating the roasted giant king squid and chatting happily. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking at the door rang out. Chapter 55, The Pure and Sultry Princess, First Meeting with Princess Vivi. Master Crocus, are you there? The knocking on the door ceased. A sweet voice drifted from behind the door. Even without seeing the face of the person knocking, Laluan knew from the voice alone that it belonged to an exceptionally beautiful girl. As the knocking sounded, Crocus immediately looked nervously at Laluan and the others, who were currently feasting. He was terrified that the sound of the knocking might displease these masters. Seeing that Laluan and the others had no reaction, Crocus stood up immediately. Excuse me, masters. It might be a friend of mine. I'll go take a look. Despite being the doctor of the Pirate King, he was incredibly respectful when facing Laluan and his crew, especially Laluan himself. To Crocus, the people before him were the most terrifying individuals he had ever encountered. Even Captain Roger had never given him a feeling as overwhelming as these people did. With Saitama and Pluton, the terror was something tangible. But facing Laluan, one could only feel that he was exceptionally mysterious and powerful, an absolute powerhouse. Yet, he didn't possess that vague sense of pressure that Pluton had. It could only be said that, as expected of the mysterious captain of the mysterious otherworld pirate crew, he was indeed mysterious enough. No wonder the Marine gave him such a title. As a crew member of the Pirate King, he had never seen any pirate crew on this sea receive a bounty in the billions the very first time they set sail. Even Captain Roger of their Roger Pirates only broke the 2 billion mark long after entering the New World. Yet these people, upon their first bounty, already possessed rewards nearly rivaling the 4 emperors. In the current seas, the people inside his small hut were definitely among the most mysterious. Crocus actually didn't quite understand why such mysterious powerhouses would appear in his home now. However, Crocus knew clearly that he absolutely could not let the girl knocking come inside at this time. Walking quickly to the door, Crocus opened it swiftly and stepped outside. Looking at the blue-haired girl before him, he didn't hesitate to speak directly to her. "You should leave quickly, it's a bit inconvenient for me right now." The girl at the door had waist-length, light blue wavy hair, a beautiful face, and a graceful figure. It was a perfect, hourglass figure. On either side of her forehead, 2 strands of hair hung past her shoulders, and the rest was tied into a high ponytail. But on her beautiful face, her small mouth and eyes were filled with great confusion. Inconvenient? This was the first time she had heard such words from Crocus. Usually, when she came here secretly to spar with Crocus, he was always very enthusiastic and would teach her combat techniques. He had become even more dedicated after learning about her identity and story. What was going on today? However, before Vivi could react, she heard faint, noisy sounds coming from inside the wooden hut that had always been extremely quiet. "Master Crocus, do you have guests?" Before Vivi's questioning voice faded, she saw an extremely familiar figure walk out from inside the small wooden hut. "Crocus? Why did you come out? Where is your wine kept?" Seeing the person who walked out of the hut, dressed in elegant black formal wear and carrying a longsword encrusted with jewels, Vivi's eyes instantly widened, her cherry-like mouth gaped open, and her body involuntarily began to tremble. "Hawk! Hawk! Hawkeye! Master my Hawk!" She was far too familiar with the man before her. The world's strongest swordsman. One of the former Shichibukai. After renouncing his Shichibukai status, he had joined the most talked about and hottest pirate crew in the world today, the Otherworld Pirate Crew. Without exaggeration, Vivi truly felt that everyone in the world was currently discussing the Otherworld Pirate Crew. Whether it was the defeat of Marine hero Garp and Admiral Kizaru, or those mysterious powerhouses with bounties near 3 billion upon their first reward. To be able to make the world's strongest swordsman serve as the crew's chef, one could see just how powerful this mysterious Otherworld pirate crew was. It could be said that although news of this Otherworld pirate crew had spread throughout the world by now, not many people actually believed it. After all, the news was a bit too bizarre. An admiral had been defeated. The news was so real it seemed fake. Such a legendary figure had suddenly appeared before her like this. Vivi was inevitably shocked and froze in place. When Hawkeye saw Vivi after stepping out, he merely gave her a look, asking nothing and saying nothing. He patted Crocus on the shoulder, told him to get the wine, and then returned inside. Vivi stared intently at Hawkeye's figure. Her gaze followed Hawkeye as he opened the door to re-enter the hut. The moment she looked through the crack in the door, Vivi's eyes met Laluan's. In that instant of eye contact, Vivi recognized him. This was the most sought-after figure in the world right now, the mysterious captain of the Otherworld pirate crew Laluan. A super powerhouse with a bounty as high as 3.56 billion berries from his very first reward. If she could get to know this person, then all her problems would be solved instantly. Even Crocodile would probably be nothing more than an ant before him. But did she really have such qualifications? In the moment their gazes met, many thoughts raced through Vivi's mind. At the same time, many thoughts also crossed Luluan's mind. Later, the child's name could be Leo, or maybe Thunder. It had to be said, Vivi had a face that looked like a pure first love. She had the vibe of a white moonlight from a campus novel. Although Luluan recognized Vivi, the princess of the kingdom of Alabasta, the moment their eyes met, in reality, she looked much better than in the anime. And she was a princess who was equally broad-minded and selfless. Pure and sultry. That was the most appropriate description Luluan could think of. For such a beautiful woman to be standing outside without anyone inviting her in for a meal, the world had truly gone to the dogs. The righteous Luluan would absolutely not allow such a thing to happen. So, after a brief pause, Luluan stood up straight with a whoosh and walked toward the door. His steps were full of determination. His eyes were full of lust, determination. Chapter 56, Whiskey Peak, Cheers from Both Sides. Captain Luluan. Crocus, who was just about to close the door, saw Luluan get up and walk toward the entrance, and immediately spoke respectfully. However, Luluan completely ignored his greeting. After bypassing him, he walked straight out the door. Crocus watched Luluan's figure, his heart filled with worry, yet he truly did not dare to offer any resistance. By now, various possible consequences had already crossed his mind. But what he never expected was that Luluan would walk up to Vivi and ask with a smile, "Nefertari D. Vivi? We must be fated to be able to meet here." Luluan looked at Vivi at this moment. He was incredibly excited. This excitement wasn't just because she was fair-skinned and beautiful, with a large chest and long legs. Most importantly, she was both a member of Baroque Works and the princess of the Alabasta Kingdom. Both of these identities were very important to Luluan. Because both identities were very lucrative. They directly related to how many new partners he could recruit and how many new traits he could obtain. Baroque Works, abbreviated as BW, was a secret criminal organization stationed in Alabasta, and its president was one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Sir Crocodile. On the surface, Baroque Works' goal was to overthrow Alabasta and establish an ideal kingdom, but its true purpose was to obtain the ancient weapon Pluton to gain even greater power. In any case, regardless of his purpose, achieving this goal required a massive amount of financial support. So, at Whiskey Peak, the entrance to the Grand Line, the executive agents of Baroque Works hid themselves as local residents, lurking there to attack passing pirates, stealing their belongings or claiming their bounties. They had amassed a vast amount of wealth. Luluan had already considered the wealth of Baroque Works as his own the moment he arrived at Reverse Mountain. As for the Alabasta Kingdom, it was even more extraordinary. The Alabasta Kingdom was a superpower located in the first half of the Grand Line, with a population exceeding 10 million and its capital in Aliobarna. 800 years ago, Queen Nefertari and 19 other kings jointly founded the world government. However, it was the only founding nation that did not stay in Mary Geos to become celestial dragons. Although it was relatively poor now, it wasn't that they had no money. It was just that the money wasn't in the hands of the common people. Lord Luluan. Hello? Seeing a legendary figure like Luluan take the initiative to walk up to her and even call out her name, Vivi's current mood could be described as both nervous and excited. At the same time, she felt it was a bit surreal. How could a figure standing at the apex of the sea actually know her? Don't be so formal, Vivi. Come, there's some very delicious roasted giant squid inside. Let's go in and have some. After leading Vivi into the house, Luluan didn't say much. In the room full of people, no one except Nami spared Vivi a second glance. They were all just focused on eating. However, friendship between girls does indeed grow very quickly. In the short span of a single meal, Nami and Vivi began to walk arm in arm, looking very close. However, even Luluan could clearly see it. Vivi was currently very much on her guard. Although she seemed to be laughing happily with Nami, her expression and movements were clearly a bit awkward. After they finished eating, Luluan and the others bid their farewells and prepared to set off for Whiskey Peak. As they were leaving, Crocus watched Luluan's group take Vivi directly onto the ship, clearly having no intention of leaving her behind. His expression appeared quite conflicted. "Old man, don't worry. That young girl will be fine." Upon hearing Hawkeye's voice, Crocus turned his head to look at Hawkeye. In truth, no matter what happens, if the captain wants her to live, she will be fine. Conversely, if the captain wanted to move against her, there's nothing you could do anyway. Rest easy. These words were very blunt. Crocus glanced at Hawkeye's departing back and then at Vivi, who was laughing on the ship. He also gave a relatively bitter smile and waved at everyone on the ship. That whale, after being looked at by Saitama, had been very quiet during this time and hadn't gone to ram into the mountain or anything. Therefore, this journey of ascending against the current was exceptionally smooth. Aha! This is so cool! Nami shouted excitedly as she watched the massive marine warship riding the waves and rushing upward against the flow. Luluan also found everything around him very interesting. Nature's uncanny workmanship is always the best scenery and the greatest experience. After following the rising current to the top of the mountain, their vision shifted, and the ship was sailing on the sea again. And after passing through a thick patch of fog, the sound of cheering began to drift over from ahead. However, once the warship passed through the fog and was seen by the crowd, the cheering came to an abrupt halt. There was no helping it, the ship Luluan had seized was a standard Marine Vice Admiral-class warship. Furthermore, this warship was even more luxurious than other warships. The people cheering here were not simple villagers, they were members of Baroque works playing a role. Naturally, these people could tell that the warship before them was not ordinary. So they didn't follow their usual routine. Instead, they silently dispersed, seemingly hoping that Luluan's warship would simply sail away from this place. Unfortunately, Luluan's ship came to a direct halt in the very center after sailing out of the mist. Seeing the ship stop, several executive agents of Baroque works mixed in the crowd immediately signaled toward the back. Mr. 6, Mr. 7, all the way to Mr. 12, along with their partners, 14 people in total, were the actual ones in charge of this area. Usually, they were responsible for leading the agents at this entrance to the Grand Line to raise funds. A Vice Admiral level vessel was considered a trouble level, they wouldn't normally take the initiative to deal with it. But now that the warship had stopped, it clearly meant there was an intention to cause trouble. They wouldn't be afraid of this single warship that appeared to have few people on board. "Vivi, why are you on the ship?" Just as Luluan and the others walked onto the deck, a man in the crowd wearing a green suit suddenly looked at Vivi on the deck and shouted out. As this voice appeared, Luluan and his group also reached the front of the deck. The executive agents below, upon seeing their faces, were instantly stunned where they stood. Chapter 57, New Companion, Yasuo. Among the crowd below. Some people's bodies began to tremble unnaturally. At this moment, Saitama, standing beside Luluan, scanned the people below and frowned. "Captain, there seem to be quite a few monsters here, though there are some normal humans too." Hearing Saitama's words, Luluan first turned his head to look at Vivi beside him. "Vivi, do you know where your organization's money is usually hidden?" "I know." Upon hearing Vivi's affirmative answer, Luluan turned his head directly and gave Saitama a meaningful look. With just that one look, Vivi knew that the vast majority of these Baroque works members below probably wouldn't survive. Recalling her partner, Mr. 9, who wore green clothes and had orange hair, Vivi wanted to speak up to stop it, wanting to ask this lord to spare his life. But she didn't have time to say it. Because the moment Luluan gave Saitama that look, a monstrous aura instantly soared into the sky. At this time, Saitama stood at the front of the deck with a resolute expression. Clearing the area. In just a few seconds, more than half of the people in the crowd below all collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Not just fainted, but knocked out cold. This group of people in the first half of Paradise, although they had harmed many, mostly victimized passing pirates. And generally, pirates about to enter the Grand Line wouldn't have little assets on their ships. These pirates basically brought their entire net worth to brave the Grand Line. And facing this group of Baroque works executive agents, those Mr. Ranks and their subordinates, the millions and billions, Luluan really had no interest in playing house with them. The money was right in front of him. Of course, he had to know what was most important. Right now, there were only a few people on his ship. It was time to add some new members. And the wealth of Baroque works happened to be able to satisfy this small wish of his. Ah! While Luluan was happily thinking about this, those below who hadn't fallen unconscious looked at the bodies all over the ground and felt the overwhelming pressure dissipate. Some screamed in fear and fled the scene, while others collapsed weakly on the spot. Mr. 9, dressed in green, was now standing there drenched in sweat, staring blankly at the people on the deck. "Let's go, Vivi. Go down and see your partner, and also lead us to your Baroque works treasury." In Luluan's words, he didn't hide his love and desire for wealth in the slightest. Just like when he spoke to Vivi, his eyes secretly scanned her chest. He was being completely genuine. After hearing Luluan's words, Vivi actually felt much more at ease than before. After all, the clearer Luluan's goals were, the happier she was. Facing such a powerful person, the scariest thing is not knowing what they like. Of course. "Lord Luluan, it is Vivi's honor to lead the way for you. I'll go see my companion first." After Vivi got off the ship, she quickly went to the side of the green-clad Mr. 9. After whispering a few words in his ear, Luluan saw the man in green trot away quickly. Vivi then returned to the side of the ship and led Luluan and the others toward the warehouse where Baroque works kept their treasure. Since this town was entirely populated by their own people, and every once in a while, after accumulating a certain amount, they would take turns being responsible for escorting these treasures to the kingdom of Alabasta, Vivi knew exactly where the treasure was kept. Leading Luluan's group, Vivi soon arrived outside the warehouse. At this time, Mr. 9 was standing respectfully by the gate. Seeing Luluan and the others, he immediately performed a deep, respectful bow, prostrating himself on the ground, his body trembling slightly, not daring to look up at all. Looking at the two wide-open doors and seeing the chests stacked up inside, Luluan happily ran toward the inside of the warehouse. As soon as he entered the warehouse, the system voice in his mind rang out directly. "Ding! Loot detected. Estimated total value is approximately 920 million berries. Does the host choose to collect it all? Over 900 million berries." The value of this warehouse full of treasure chests indeed somewhat exceeded Luluan's expectations. Originally, Luluan thought it would be good if there were 100 million, since these pirates hadn't even passed through the Grand Line to enter the New World yet. But he hadn't expected this warehouse to give him such a big surprise. It seemed that there were quite a lot of pirates who had already made a fortune before even entering the Grand Line. However, their net worth had now become his gain. Previously, after he finished summoning Pluton in the settings, he actually had 50 million berries left. On the way to Reverse Mountain, he had dealt with some minor East Blue pirates and obtained some treasure, all of which had been collected into the system. Now, adding this warehouse, it was just enough for him to perform a summon. When this thought occurred to Luluan, the system prompt sounded at the appropriate time. Ding! The host now has a balance of 1 billion berries. Does the host choose to perform a summon? Yes. Summon a Myriad Worlds character companion. Ding! Myriad Worlds character companion summoning. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the companion, Yasuo. Yasuo, an unyielding Ionian and an agile swordsman who wields the wind itself. This proud young man was wrongly accused of murdering his elder. Unable to prove his innocence, Yasuo killed his own brother in self-defense. Later, although the truth behind the elder's death was revealed, Yasuo could not forgive his own actions. He exiled himself to the ends of the earth, letting the wind guide his blade. Due to the blessing of a mysterious power, he can transform into various forms and gain various ultimate powers, such as High Noon, Blood Moon, Dragonmancer, Truth Dragon, Nightbringer, and so on. Skills: Way of the Wanderer, Steel Tempest, Wind Wall, Sweeping Blade, Last Breath. Setting in this world: invincible. Various forms? Mysterious power? The blue and green modifier is still at work. However, with these enhancements, Yasuo's strength had similarly become invincible. For Luluan, this was naturally excellent news. After the system's voice faded, Lillian only felt a sudden gust of wind rise beside him. This wind wasn't very strong, but it came very fast, and it clearly wasn't an ordinary wind because this wind came with blue special effects. Visualized wind. Chapter 58, The Gale has a path home. A blue-white wind formed a three-dimensional cocoon of wind. As this wind cocoon appeared, Saitama and Pluton immediately arrived at Lillian's side. Hawkeye soon arrived inside the warehouse as well. Looking at the wind cocoon before him, the supreme-grade sword Yoro on Hawkeye's back began to tremble incessantly. Hawkeye's yellow eyes were fixed intently on that wind cocoon. No! It was a sword cocoon. That wasn't wind, but strands of sword chi intertwined together, looking just like wind. As this sword chi cocoon dissipated, a figure appeared in everyone's field of vision. The man wore an open blue Japanese-style samurai robe, revealing a sturdy chest and a striking scar. A thick rope tied his loose hakama at the waist, a sword hung on his left, the unsheathed blade, while a wine gourd hung on his right. Thick black hair was tied back into a neat, high ponytail. Yet a few unruly strands of hair fell across his forehead. Under everyone's gaze, the man slowly turned his face and looked at Lillian. A resolute face with Eastern features, brows tightly knit, and a sharp yet weathered gaze that seemed to always hold a hint of loneliness. The scar on his right cheek and the stubble on his chin clearly etched his past. Those weathered eyes seemed to burst with a flicker of life and light the moment they saw Lillian. Captain, I never thought we would meet here again. Though I wander to the ends of the earth, I have not lost my true heart. I never imagined that one day, I would finally find the way home. Yasuo, welcome. Hearing Lillian's words, Yasuo walked to Lillian's side. Meeting Lillian's warm smile, Yasuo was dazed for a moment. Then, to Lillian's surprise, Yasuo actually walked right over and gave him a hug. After Lillian returned the hug, Yasuo let go and revealed a smile that was equally warm. Captain, I am tired. Go rest. Our ship is right in the middle of the sea. Find an empty room and have a good sleep. Yasuo nodded with a smile to Pluton and Saitama, and after receiving their responses, his figure turned back into a wisp of wind and vanished on the spot. Lillian actually knew a bit about Yasuo's story. After all, he had been a hardcore gamer back in the day. A sword's shadow, a gale's return. This phrase was perhaps the portrayal of Yasuo's entire life. Just now, the moment Yasuo appeared, looking at those weathered eyes and that weathered face, Lillian actually felt a pang in his heart, a mysterious sense of heartache. However, the falling leaf has returned to its roots. The gale has found its way home. Yasuo could have a good rest, and then, they would enjoy this wonderful world together. Turning his head, Pluton was gazing thoughtfully in the direction Yasuo had left, while Saitama still stood there looking silly. But Hawkeye was trembling all over, his eyes filled with the light of excitement. Just now, Hawkeye felt as if he had seen the thing he pursued most in this world. Previously, he had wondered if the otherworld pirate crew would have any powerful swordsmen. Now, Hawkeye knew he had met one. This was no longer just a powerful swordsman. He is the sword, and the sword is him. This man had clearly reached the end of the way of the sword in Hawkeye's mind, a supreme swordmaster like the gale itself. Having practiced the sword for so many years and being called the world's strongest swordsman, Hawkeye felt that he couldn't even see the back of that supreme swordmaster from just now. That man was already the way of the sword itself. Looking at Hawkeye's yellow eyes gazing in the direction of Yasuo's departure, they seemed to have turned into stars. Lillian walked to Hawkeye's side, patted his shoulder, and said with a smile, Hawkeye, that man just now is named Yasuo, and he is also a member of our otherworld pirate crew. If you want to follow him and learn the sword, then you must work hard to become the world's #1 chef. Really? But after hearing Lillian's words, the stars in Hawkeye's eyes grew even brighter. He was like a lost child who had found his true direction. And seeing Hawkeye's reaction, Lillian burst into hearty laughter. The Hawkeye in the original story could indeed become stronger, he simply lacked the motivation to grow and the opponent he desired in his eyes. And now, Lillian had directly supplied him with nuclear power. Surely, Hawkeye's future would become even stronger. That's how it should be. Even the chef on his ship should be one of the top powerhouses in the world. On the side, Vivi and Mr. Nine, having witnessed all this, felt their brains could no longer keep up. They didn't even dare to look up at the group. It turned out the Otherworld pirate crew didn't just have those few people on the bounty posters, there were other members too. And the way this member appeared was simply too exaggerated. The moment that Wind appeared, they only took one look and felt as if the whole world was being torn apart. Even their eyes began to throb with pain. However, Vivi looked at the laughing Laluan. She felt that the thing she had wanted to achieve all these years seemed to have hope now, and a clear direction as well. For so many years, undercover in Baroque Works, what Vivi really wanted was to gather strength to overthrow Baroque Works and Crocodile. To restore the Alabastic Kingdom to the way it was in her memories before the Civil War occurred. To Vivi, the Alabastic Kingdom was the most beautiful country in the world. After this period of being undercover, Vivi had already learned some facts. She knew that back then, it was the Shichibukai crocodile who launched Operation Utopia through Baroque Works, creating a 3-year drought and framing her father. Using dance powder to trigger a large-scale civil war, completely destroying this country. But due to the meticulousness of the opponent's plan, he had even become a hero of the kingdom now. Vivi had been undercover for so long, and although she had uncovered these truths, she felt increasingly powerless. Because with her strength alone, there was absolutely no way to defeat Crocodile, and absolutely no way to expose this conspiracy to the world. Although she had been gathering strength and trying to find ways to learn, wanting to become stronger herself, it was ultimately too slow, she was still too weak. But just at this moment, a dawn descended from the heavens. When Laluan smiled at her, Vivi only felt it was as warm as the winter sun, as if all the pain and coldness in the depths of her heart were being smoothed away. As long as this man was willing to help her, then she was willing to offer everything she possessed. Chapter 59, The Protagonist of This World, Lord Laluan. Vivi curled her hands in front of her chest, her eyes resolute, as if she had mustered all the courage of her life to shout at Laluan, who was not far away. After hearing Vivi's shout, Laluan turned his head in some confusion and looked at the blue-haired girl. Meeting Laluan's gaze, Vivi trotted tremblingly to the front of Laluan. Mr. Laluan, I must confess to you that I am currently an employee of Baroque Works. This town was actually created by our Baroque Works to plunder the wealth of passing pirates. Before Vivi could finish her sentence, she saw Laluan make a shush gesture toward her. I know all of this. After hearing Laluan's words, Vivi didn't dare hesitate any longer and knelt straight down before Laluan. Mr. Laluan, please save the Alabastic Kingdom. Save the tens of millions of people in the kingdom. I swear as the princess of the Alabastic Kingdom. If you are willing to help, the Alabastic Kingdom is willing to acknowledge you as its master. We will use the strength of the entire nation to earn money for you. We are willing to offer you everything we have. Vivi's voice was firm and serious. She had absolutely no worry that Laluan might also be a scoundrel. Of course, perhaps it was because Laluan's Isho was simply too sunny and too warm in Vivi's heart. And Laluan looked at Vivi kneeling on the ground. At this moment, he was indeed very happy in his heart. After resolving the Alabastic Kingdom incident, he might never have to worry about financial sources again. After all, the Alabastic Kingdom was one of the largest countries in this world. Although the Alabastic Kingdom was currently very poor due to Crocodile's series of maneuvers. But it would be fine as long as the trouble was resolved. This matter was very simple. All right, Vivi, get up. We'll do exactly as you said. Facing Vivi's proposal, Laluan really couldn't think of any reason to refuse. After all, this matter was entirely beneficial and not at all harmful to him. Solving a small trouble to gain the allegiance of a super kingdom, was there anything more worthwhile in this world? Furthermore, looking at the girl kneeling before him, Laluan also knew how rough her experiences had been. Although she looked very weak kneeling before him now, she was definitely a resilient girl. Really? You've agreed. Thank you, Lord Laluan. Thank you, Lord Laluan. Upon hearing Laluan's answer, Vivi's voice immediately took on a sobbing tone, her expression full of excitement and gratitude. She moved to kowtow, but Luluan stopped her. Meanwhile, Mr. 9, who was following beside them, couldn't hide his shock after hearing Vivi reveal her identity. As Vivi's partner in Baroque works, Mr. 9 could be said to be the person closest to her. Even though he had declared his loyalty to Baroque works countless times before, in his heart, Vivi was the one he should be loyal to. Although after this identity was revealed, Vivi seemed to have directly become his enemy, but, now, Baroque works was his true enemy. This thought was definitely not due to the terrifying pressure of the Otherworld pirate crew, but because he truly considered Vivi his friend. Vivi. I am willing to risk my life to help you. Mr. 9's sudden declaration even gave Luluan a start. We're discussing things properly here. Why are you coming over to cause trouble, kid? And what life are you risking? Also, weren't those words meant for Vivi? Why are you looking at me with a gaze as if you're on a pilgrimage? There's even a look of pure flattery in your eyes. This guy's words were definitely not meant for Vivi on the ground, they were likely aimed at him. Anyway, it was just Crocodile. Going there would just be a matter of convenience, there was no need for anyone to risk their life. He didn't even need the crew members he had summoned to act, even the current Hawkeye could likely resolve Crocodile quite easily. Alright, enough talk. We'll rest for the night and officially set out tomorrow. Coo. After waking up the next morning, the Newscoos newspaper arrived as scheduled. Walking out of the cabin onto the deck, Luluan saw Yasuo and the others already eating the breakfast Hawkeye had prepared, a harmonious scene of them reading the newspaper. He couldn't help but show a heartfelt smile. In the blink of an eye, it had been some time since he transmigrated to this world. Now, Luluan felt that he had completely integrated into this world. He didn't even think about being a transmigrator very often anymore. And as for the people before him, Luluan truly considered them partners and family. After all, they were flesh and blood, and Luluan could feel their sincere hearts toward him. One could only say that simply reading a story is completely different from actually interacting with a person. The feeling is entirely different. Captain, you're awake. Come look at today's newspaper. Seeing the captain walk onto the deck, Nami skipped over with a newspaper and handed it to Luluan. Luluan was led by the arm by Nami to the dining table. Eating the new varieties of dishes Hawkeye had prepared, Luluan felt truly surprised. Who would have thought that Hawkeye's skills as a cook were actually getting better and better? It was just that Hawkeye no longer hovered around Saitama and Pluton like before. Instead, he stood by Yasuo's side, his eyes drifting over to steal a few glances from time to time. He was wholeheartedly serving Yasuo alone. It was plain to see. Hawkeye really wanted to break the ice and close the distance between him and Yasuo. Everything on this ship seemed to be getting more and more interesting. Taking a big bite of the steak, its outer skin slightly charred and its interior juicy and slightly pinkish, Luluan opened the newspaper in his hand to take a look. He had originally thought there wouldn't be any major news worth his concern. But in the section at the very edge of the newspaper, Luluan saw a very familiar name and a very concise piece of news. Straw Hat Luffy defeated the captain of the Marines' 153rd branch, Morgan, the father of Helmeppo, nicknamed Axehand Morgan, and rescued the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. It seemed the protagonist of this world had also set out to sea by now. No. After he transmigrated to this world, perhaps the protagonist of this world was no longer that so-called Straw Hat. Chapter 60, Landing in Alabasta on the warship. Lord Luluan and the others gathered around a dining table, relishing the delicacies prepared by Hawkeye with great gusto. However, Vivi and Mr. 9 didn't dare to even think about joining them at the table. They were doing their best to minimize their presence. It couldn't be helped. The people on this ship were simply too terrifying. Since boarding, the only person Vivi had dared to exchange a few words with was Nami. To Vivi, everyone else was a figure of legend. Only Nami seemed like an ordinary person like herself, at least, that was how Vivi perceived her. Vivi, come over and eat. Why are you two over there? Hearing Nami's call, Vivi and Mr. 9 finally walked over. The two sat at a corner of the table with Nami, who greeted them warmly. Everyone at the table looked very happy while eating, and under Nami's guidance, the atmosphere remained relatively lively. However, sitting with Nami, Vivi could see that beneath Nami's current sunny demeanor, there were some hidden shadows. The way Nami looked at the others also carried a sense of awe and reverence. Perhaps it was because she had learned more and more about this world since arriving in the new world. Nami didn't seem as lively as she used to be. In the beginning, in Nami's eyes, Lord Leiluin and Hawkeye were just powerful people. They didn't represent anything else to her, as she didn't have a very clear understanding of their status. But now, Nami increasingly understood exactly what kind of ship she had boarded. The enemy she once thought she could never defeat in her entire life were nothing more than the smallest of small fry in this region of the new world where she now found herself. A bounty in the tens of millions was considered a great pirate in the East Blue. But now, on her ship, everyone had bounties in the billions, except for her. During this time, Nami hadn't been without the desire to grow stronger, with Pluton's help and Hawkeye's guidance, her growth had been very rapid. But Nami also knew clearly. Even though she now had the ability to defeat pirates with tens of millions in bounties, she was still ultimately too weak on this ship. And once this thought appeared, it would take root deep within her heart. Even if no one around you would ever look down on you for being too weak, your own mind would inevitably wander and overthink. Nami was currently in such a phase. She had also asked Pluton and Saitama for advice on how to become stronger. However, the things Mr. Pluton said were far too profound and completely inapplicable to her, though Lord Pluton had at least helped her use the power of annihilation to clear some impurities from her body. But Lord Saitama, no matter how she asked, he would only tease her, saying things that sounded like he was coaxing a child. Nami, becoming strong is very difficult. Master Saitama, I'm not afraid of hardships. Please teach me. You need to complete 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run every single day for at least 3 years. Listening to Saitama's words and seeing his serious expression, Nami turned and left immediately. There's no way someone would tease people like this. Mr. Saitama is simply too mean. He usually looks so unserious, nothing like the profound Lord Pluton. Vivi, I heard you're the princess of the Alabasta Kingdom. That's amazing, no wonder you're so beautiful. This is my first time talking to a princess. Nami shifted her gaze and looked at Vivi. She stopped thinking about the things that upset her and began chatting with Vivi. As they talked, the conversation naturally and inevitably turned to Baroque works and the Alabasta Kingdom. Vivi spoke about how she had endured and laid low to become an undercover agent in Baroque works. She spoke of how Crocodile had manufactured a 3-year drought and framed her father for it. This had caused internal strife in the kingdom, leading to widespread suffering. By the time she reached this point, Nami was already fuming with anger. Beside them, Mr. Nine also gave Vivi a look of serious acknowledgement. Nami looked at Vivi. Although she had only known this girl for a short time, Vivi was even more resilient than she had imagined. Not only was her status impressive, but her character was too. Nami couldn't help but think. This girl, if only I had the ability to help her personally, how great would that be? The warship sailed smoothly across the sea. A few days passed in a flash. Soon, a massive island appeared before Lord Leiluin. No, what was in front of him could no longer be called an island. This was the first time Lord Leiluin had seen a horizon since coming to this world. He saw a large landmass in the truest sense. As someone with the Sea King trait, Lord Leiluin had become very accustomed to being on a ship and at sea, but seeing this horizon now, he felt a momentary sense of daze. The people standing beside him also appeared somewhat excited upon seeing the horizon ahead. After all, for these people, none of them were characters who frequently stayed at sea. Living on land was clearly more within their comfort zone. Lord Leiluin. Ahead of us is our Alabasta Kingdom. Perhaps because she hadn't been back in a long time, Vivi looked extremely excited as she gazed at the distant horizon. There was the excitement of returning to her homeland, but more than that, there was worry. Having been away from home for so long, Vivi herself didn't actually know what the Alabasta Kingdom had become or if her father was still alive. Even as an undercover agent in Baroque works, her missions were always in paradise, targeting passing pirates. She rarely had the chance to return to the headquarters located within the kingdom. Even when escorting money back, she couldn't enter, she could only leave it at a certain location outside for people sent from headquarters to collect. But now, she was going to step onto her own soil openly and honorably. She no longer needed to be as cautious as before. Looking at the man beside her, Vivi felt a sense of security like never before. Soon, the warship reached the coastline. Stepping onto land. Looking at the surrounding woods, Lord Lalowan was truly very curious. Seeing the seaside covered in lush green vegetation and towering trees, perhaps if Crocodile hadn't intervened, the entire Alabasta kingdom would be such a vibrant scene of life and growth. Following Vivi's lead, they walked forward for a distance. Lord Lalowan felt that after walking about 1,000 meters, he had seemingly entered another world entirely. That's it for today. Meet you in next part.